responses to any questions that are taken on notice through the course of this inquiry. I now welcome representatives from the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications and the Arts and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I understand officers have been given the information of parliamentary privilege. For the Hansard record, could you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appeared today?
Thank you, Senator. Marisa Purvis-Smith. I am the Deputy Secretary of Transport Group in the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications and the Arts.
Richard Wood, First Assistant Secretary, International Aviation, Technology and Services from the same department.
Ben Vincent, Domestic Policy and Programs Branch, Assistant Secretary.
Stephanie Werner, First Assistant Secretary, Domestic Aviation and Reform in the same department.
Ridwan Jadwat, First Assistant Secretary, Middle East and Africa Division, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Mr Wolfe.
Mr Wolfe is, we are expecting Mr Wolfe to be here. He is not here as yet. We're expecting him to attend imminently.
Excellent. Excellent. Do you have either of the departments have an opening statement?
I do not, Senator. I'm happy to go into questions as you have.
No, Senator.
I do just have a quick question for you, Ms Purvis-Smith. Where is Secretary Betts?
When we looked at who should attend and we received your letter and the Secretary received your letter, Senator, asking for the relevant officials, and so we have the relevant officials here to be able to answer levels of detail, and so the officials were in my group as Transport Group, so we decided that we're bringing quite a few officials, not just one or two, so that I would represent the department as Deputy Secretary.
And so that will mean taking on notice won't be a thing we'll be seeing this morning?
We hope not. We've come prepared as much as we possibly can.
Excellent.
And I think that the Secretary Betts's response to your letter mentioned that noting that the Minister has claimed public interest immunity over some documents, but we have come prepared for dates and material that you asked for in your letter. So
and we will be going to the FOIs that have also dug up documents that the Minister has refused to release publicly through the Senate. I did want to just understand who's acting for the Minister for Transport at the moment. As I understand it, Minister King is on leave.
Minister King's on leave.
So who is the acting Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development Minister?
Don't have that on the top of my head, although I will have it on me. I can provide that to you very quickly.
Thank you so much. I might go to Senator Birmingham for questions.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Senator Orman-Payne, who did the late shift with me last night.
Sorry, I've got another commitment.
Thank you. My apologies.
Thanks very much for your indulgence, Chair. So my questions are for the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications and the Arts, not Foreign Affairs and Trade. Did your department give advice to the Minister regarding the decision whether to grant Qatar additional air rights?
Yes, Senator. It might be worthwhile us taking you through a little bit of what we do and how we go through the bilateral process.
I've actually got another commitment, so I'd be keen to just ask my questions if that's okay, and if you want to give context later on, that would be fine. All right, so in giving that advice, was protecting Qantas's profits and market share part of the advice that was given regarding that decision?
So again, Senator, what might be useful is to go through our process. In terms of content, as I mentioned, the Minister has claimed public interest immunity over documents in relation to the content of our advice.
On what grounds?
And the grounds that she has mentioned is foreign relations. The bilateral process that we work in, and the system is one of treaties, is one of negotiations between countries. It's not about, we don't get requests from airlines, even though the airlines themselves have views and talk to us. They are country-to-country bilateral negotiations.
So is that applicable across all scope of all documents?
In terms of the input into the negotiating mandate, the public interest immunity has been claimed across all.
We never entered negotiations. I'm not sure how there's a negotiating mandate.
Correct. That's right, and that negotiating mandate, all of the input into that decision being made, the public interest immunity on foreign international relations was claimed on all of those documents.
All right, so let me rephrase my question then. If you're not going to tell me whether protecting Qantas's profits and market share was part of the advice, should it have been, in your opinion?
I think that goes to an opinion, Senator. I can't provide an opinion.
Okay. In a year where Qantas posted a record profit, is it reasonable for the Acting Treasurer to say that protecting their profits is in the national interest?
Again, that would go to an opinion, Senator.
Is maintaining Qantas's 60% market share, which is an effective monopoly, and we heard yesterday from Professor Fells that it equates to something similar to that, is that something that would typically be part of the advice of a decision like this?
I think I can say, and it goes through in our submission, we did make a submission to the committee, and part of the material we go through is the state of the market, the state of the international market, and those types of issues, which we've also put in our submission, Senator.
Well, maybe for the committee, given your submission is simply printing off your website. It's not the usual detailed submission I would expect from a department of your size and experience on an issue that the Australian public has been exercised about for a long time. So I think you owe Senator Allman-Payne a more sufficient answer than point to our website.
Because my question is, would it typically be part of that? And you're talking about, we'll talk about the state of the market. So is what you're saying that it would have been identified in a submission like that if a particular entity or firm had such a dominant share of the market?
Again, I might
go to generalities,
ask my colleague, Mr. Wood.
That's what I'm trying to get
go
to.
through. And again, it goes to the nature of the bilateral process and how we went through this process. And in particular, there were a range of stages in terms of going out and seeking information, which was inputted into getting a priority list of countries, and then moving to the stage of getting a negotiating mandate for particular countries, being Qatar. So I might go ask my colleague, Mr. Wood, but as I mentioned, it would take into account and go through the state of the current market and the aviation market.
Okay, so if you did have a dominant player that had such a huge percentage of the market, that would form part of that advice.
And we would have, and we received input, and that input would have been included.
Who did you receive
material.
input from?
So we might actually go through, if you're getting into who received input from, how we go through the process and who we sought input from and the stakeholders and who we went through. Would that be helpful? I think that's where we're getting to.
Yes, please.
And I think that might be worthwhile, Mr. Wood, to take us through the two processes by which we went out for the negotiating mandate on particular countries and then into Qatar and who we sought input from.
Yep. Thank you. Senators, the process that we go through is essentially towards the beginning or in the lead up to each year. We have a consultation process where we go out to identified interested stakeholders. We have a list of 57 stakeholders which represents industry groups, Commonwealth and state agencies, from the aviation sector, the tourism sector and across government, which informs our advice to government on the priorities for our negotiating program. We then, in the case of Qatar, the negotiating advice that we were providing to government came very close after that process, so our follow-up stakeholder engagement was more targeted to the specific airlines, both Qantas and Virgin, because the negotiations there were focusing very much on capacity arrangements, and we already had advice from our stakeholders on the broader sort of economic and other issues associated with our programs. In the case of some other negotiations that we're looking at that have come later into the year, Turkey and Vietnam have been talked about in these hearings so far. We've gone out to the broader range of stakeholders. As I say, we've got a list of 57 stakeholders that we go out to typically, and where we get advice from others, we can take that into account as well.
Have you got a list of those 57 there?
Yes, certainly, Senator.
Could you table that, please?
Be happy to.
Thank you.
Senator Jim Wolfe, Assistant Secretary of National Aviation. I might just, in relation to the market share figure, the international market share for the Qantas Group is actually 29%. It's not 60.
I'm talking about their domestic share.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot of the analysis that we provide, without going into the details of all of our analysis, we tend to focus on international routes. As Mr Wolfe's indicated, the Australian airlines in total have got around about a third of the international market, of which the Qantas Group is the dominant player, Virgin having a smaller share to local regions. The long-haul route through to other things, to major international destinations, if you exclude Indonesia, New Zealand and the Pacific, Australian Airlines have got a smaller share of the market. It's closer to 15%, I think.
Right. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Chair. I do want to go through the process in different stages and unpack that, but before I go back to the start, I want to begin at the end. On what grounds was the application rejected?
Yes. We can read out the... sorry, I might have misunderstood your question there for a minute.
You misunderstood the question?
No,
on
I thought you were
what
actually
grounds
going...
were the Qatar application rejected? Come on, let's not start the day.
No, sorry. My apologies, Senator. I was actually thinking you were talking about the public interest immunity over the documents, but you're talking about the decision for Qatar, so my apologies for that misinterpretation. As we mentioned, and we can go through, there were a range of reasons that the Minister took into account for the Qatar. The Minister has indicated that she took into consideration a range of factors. They included what is happening in the aviation and international aviation market at the moment, what is happening with the COVID recovery, what is happening with the capacity coming back into the system, particularly from other aviation suppliers and where they are up to, and the impact on jobs in the long term. They were a range, but not the definitive full a set of factors that she took into account. Ultimately, it is a decision for the Minister.
Yeah. We will come back and unpack some of those factors a little more clearly. Are they detailed in any formal statement?
There's no formal statement or release.
Are they detailed in your submission?
The submission goes through the process by which we undertake, rather than the decision itself.
So your sentence there is the closest the country has, or the applicant has, to a statement of reasons.
We have, well, I think the Minister has gone through those factors publicly as well.
Right. As I said, we'll come back and see whether there's evidence to support what you're stating there as the reasons. But let's go back to the process. Application made 22 August 2022, is that correct?
The Qatar Civil Aviation Authority wrote to the department at that time, yes.
Okay, that's the department's agreed date in terms of when the whole process started.
I'll just double check my timeline, but in terms of, well, that was when we received a letter. I should be clear, Senator, it's not an application as such. There's no application process. It was a request by the Qatari authorities to enter into negotiations for the services for its airlines that it's requested, but it's not an application as such. It's essentially a commencement of negotiations.
Yeah. So, request to commence negotiations, dated 22 August, and received.
Senator, I should say it's 16th of August.
Dated 16th of August, received 22 August. Right. Thank you. Excellent. What does the department do next?
We at that time, Senator, and Mr Wolf may have some additional detail he'll come to, we at that time, as I'd indicated, we were going through a process of establishing advice to government on our international priorities for the forward year. So we were working on that at that time. We took into account the advice that we were receiving from stakeholders. As I indicated, we've written out to 57 stakeholders. We don't receive input from all of those. On the 30th of September, we sought further information submissions from Qantas Group and from Virgin.
So I'm just going to want to slow you down a sec there, Mr Wood. At the time, you were working on establishing your international priorities for the coming year and had gone out to 57 stakeholders.
That's correct.
This is the list that's just landed in front of me. When did you go out to those 57 stakeholders?
2nd of August.
2nd of August. Yeah. So you went out to the 57 stakeholders on a general exploration of international priorities. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes? Can I get a copy of the request or the invitation to submit that went to those 57 stakeholders?
Certainly, Senator.
Can we get that this morning?
Yep.
Thank you.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
So I'm not sure we have that with us right now, but we'll get that through you before the morning.
There's an army
it's not a long
watching
drive.
you.
Yes, Senator.
Email it and we can get it.
Whatever. I'm saying we don't have it immediately, but we'll get that for you.
So, sorry, 2nd of August. Did the invitation to these 57 reference Qatar Airways or potential for additional flights through Doha at all?
No, that would have been a little bit back to the future, Senator, because we didn't get the request from Qatar until later in August.
Right. So I think we can sort of set aside the 57 in terms of how much that relates to proper consultation. So let's come back to where I think you were, Mr Wood, which is that you had received Qatar's application. Subsequent to this separate consultation process, you received Qatar's request, sorry, not application, on the 22nd of August. You then went to who for consultation on that?
To the Qantas Group and to Virgin.
Qantas Group and to Virgin. So they were the only two stakeholders specifically consulted on that request.
Yes, Senator, that was a process at that time. One of the reasons to take into account there is the 57 stakeholders that we went to, or the stakeholders, I should say. As I indicated, we didn't get comment from all of them, but a number of those made specific commentary in relation to Qatar. Qatar obviously is an airline that people were broadly aware of as having an interest in the Australian market. So we did receive input from other stakeholders in relation to that, was taken into account in our advice, including a number of the stakeholders that you've heard through these hearings. I think one of the reasons that we targeted Virgin and Qantas specifically is because it was an unusual request. Typically when we have requests for negotiations, or we make requests for negotiations, we're looking at a wide range of issues, whereas in this instance it was very specifically about capacity issues, not about broader issues. So it was a narrower range of issues on which to consult.
So when did you invite Qantas and Virgin to make submission?
The 30th of September, Senator.
30th of September. Thank you. And we know from Qantas that they made a submission in October, is that right?
That's correct, 14th of October.
Okay. And Virgin?
On the 26th of October.
On the 26th of October. Thank you. Why are those two airlines particularly relevant?
There were two Australian carriers that operate in the international market, with the exception of some smaller freight carriers who don't operate on those routes. So they operate internationally, and they're also, of course, the dominant domestic players as well.
No. Does Virgin operate to the Middle East?
Virgin has code-share operations through to the Middle East, and it also, pre-COVID, it did have an international network, not to the Middle East, to Japan, Hong Kong and the US. It's reduced its operations, of course, since its restructure.
All right. So those two. Why only the two airlines? Why were no other stakeholders? Why not go back to your list of 57 and say, hey, we've got a request for negotiations to begin. Yeah. What do you think? On the same terms that you went to Qantas and Virgin, making that point.
So, as I've indicated, Senator, partly because of the fairly contemporaneous nature of it going out around the time that we'd gone out to stakeholders more broadly, several of whom had made detailed commentary in relation to Qatar. It was a fairly narrow request in its specificity. We had a significant amount of data, and as I've indicated, for other arrangements since that time, Turkey and Vietnam, and there's a number of others as well where we've gone out to those stakeholders more broadly, recognising that they're both broader requests and of time has moved on. Importantly, I think since that time in where were we? August, September last year, we've seen the recovery of the market. So one of the things we've been able to do is track how the market is changing over time.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. I suspect we will want to come to the recovery of the market during the course of the morning too. So you've got the two submissions then in, 14 October from Qantas, 26 October from Virgin. What next? Sorry, just before we go on, can I get a copy of the invitation to those two parties to provide their submission?
Yes, Senator.
And what was the date that invitation went out, Mr. Wolfe?
30th September.
30th of September, yep.
Thank you. And similarly, if that could come this morning, that would be fabulous. So what happens after receipt of those submissions?
They form part of the input to our analysis and advice to government, Senator, or to the Minister. So.
Yeah, yes, so the government, the department prepares its analysis and advice. In what form does that preparation take?
It's a minute to the Minister.
Takes the form of a minute or a brief to the Minister.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's no further engagement elsewhere?
No, Senator. In some talks where there are technical issues in relating to the overall arrangement, an air services agreement addresses many issues aside from the capacity of airlines to fly, goes to safety, security, a range of other factors where we may need to consult with other agencies. In this case, that was not the required. It was a straightforward, what was sought by the Qatari authorities was a straightforward amendment to the MOU, which forms part of a treaty which establishes the capacity arrangement.
Thank you. Is there any consultation across government in relation to that minute to the Minister?
As I've indicated, and I'll ask Mr. Wolfe if there's anything I'm missing here, but as I've indicated on that specific minute, no. However, there may be processes between ministers, but we did not seek advice from other entities specifically. As I've indicated, there were not the wide range of issues in a air services agreement.
The other thing I would add, Senator, is in relation to the 2nd of August consultation, while it is a generic request in relation to priorities, in terms of the advice that goes out, we do actually include some detailed advice about which particular routes are constrained. And so you would not be surprised to see that Qatar obviously was part of that route. So stakeholders were informed of those routes, which particularly had capacity constraints, and clearly a number of stakeholders responded in relation to that.
I think, Senator, if I could add, that's actually a really important point that Mr Wolf makes in forming our priorities. There's a relatively few number of air services arrangements that Australia has at the moment which actually have capacity constraints in them. Qatar is, of course, one.
Yes, it is, and it still has exactly the same capacity constraints as it did when you wrote out to those stakeholders on the 2nd of August last year. So you've received Qatar's request on 22 August. On 30 September, you've invited just Qantas and Virgin to make submissions. They've done so on 14 October and 26 October, respectively. You've not had a need to consult other departments or agencies of government. You have prepared a minute or brief to the Minister. Have I got anything wrong?
No, that's all good. And we should point out that we did mention that the priorities, that's the other advice that's provided. So there's a sequence here. You seek approval for the international priorities, and then you seek separate individual country mandates.
Did they go up together, both of those pieces of advice?
No, but need to get the priorities sorted out first.
Okay. So let's, and I don't want to get too confused between the two streams, but when did you conclude or present advice to the Minister on the priorities, the international priorities?
The 17th of November, Senator.
17th of November, the international priorities went to the Minister. When did you conclude the brief in relation to the request from Qatar?
4th of January.
That's when it arrived in the Minister's office. When?
Senator, no, it was we signed. Or Mr Wolf signed.
When
the
did it
document
leave you guys? Because we know this Minister.
Yeah. Sorry, Senator. It was signed by Mr Wolf on the 4th of January. It arrived with the Minister's office on the 9th of January. There's a delay there. It was the first week of the year. I suspect there was a delay in our parliamentary area in processing that.
And then it sat there?
Well, the Minister considered that.
Okay. So, were there any discussions or exchanges of communication between the Minister, her office or the department during that period of preparing the brief on Qatar's request about Qatar's request?
Senator, to my knowledge, we probably as you would expect, we have regular engagement with ministers' offices on priorities and things that are happening, and we would have foreshadowed, but we would be preparing advice in relation to that. But in terms of was there to and fro on what the nature of that advice would be, no, that's not what we do. We would advise that advice is coming, not seek the views of the office in relation to the nature of that advice.
Did the Minister or her office draw any particular information, analysis, opinions to your attention during that time?
I don't think so.
No.
Request you to have any further conversations, discussions or otherwise?
No, Senator.
Nope. Okay. So this was Department getting on with its business, having received the submissions by the end of October through November and December, formalised its advice. You had sent up the international priorities brief on 17 November. What response or reaction had you had from the Minister to that?
That was signed, Senator, on the 1st of December.
That was signed on the 1st of December. So a nice, quick turnaround by any good ministerial standards there. Time to read it and consider it, but certainly not lingering in terms of being returned within a 2-week period there. It was signed. Was it a brief for noting or for approval or agreement?
Agreed.
Agreement. And was it agreed?
I think that goes to the nature of the advice.
I didn't actually ask what the brief said.
No, not interested in what was in the brief.
Well, the ministers claimed public interest immunity in relation to that that brief. Not sure if that's something.
So I know Mr Wood is correct. The minister has claimed public interest immunity over that brief. It put up the negotiating the priority countries and I think outlining her decisions over the countries for priority negotiations would go to the content and...
It would if we knew what those countries were or what the recommendations were.
We're not.
But we don't know that, do we, Ms Purvis-Smith?
But also mentioning what the minister may have agreed or not agreed, or her outcome of that MinSub might also go to the breaching the public interest immunity claim that the minister has provided over the documents.
To be really clear in my question, which is not going at all to the content of the brief or the minute or the content of the recommendations. Did the minister circle agree, not agree, or did she make a variation to the recommendations?
Could I take that on notice and get back to you while we're here?
I don't really think there's a need to take it on notice, Mrs Purvis.
What I'd like to take on notice is whether providing that information would breach the public interest immunity claim that the minister has made.
Well, that actually would be a matter for the Senate to determine. Now, given in no way has the question, as I've framed it, could that in any sense breach or imperil Australia's international relations, there can be no grounds for a public interest immunity claim over that particular piece of information as it relates to the process and handling of that brief.
I think we can say the minister made decisions on the negotiating mandate in the priority countries.
So she returned the brief not unsigned or unannotated?
That's correct.
We're getting into the farcical here.
Yeah, it is incredible, the protection racket that is being run. The public interest immunity test claim is over the documents. We are not interested in seeing the documents. We are not asking questions.
But we accept a claim has been made.
A claim's been made. That's for the Senate to determine. But the questions are simply going to, irrespective of what the recommendation was, did the minister agree, disagree, say, Ms Purvis-Smith, I want to see you in the office so we can talk about this a little more. I need a little more information. That is not covered by the public interest immunity test claim, at all.
If I could take some time to take that on notice and get back to you while we're here at the committee, I would appreciate that.
Thank you, Mrs Purvis. That's a reasonable request. So, thank you. I appreciate the difficult position you're in, given the desire of the government to not be particularly transparent about any of these issues. In relation to the international priorities decision and setting, have there been any subsequent briefs particular to the international priorities sent to the minister?
Not in relation to specific
to setting of the priorities.
Yes, not in relation to the setting of the priorities. What we have been providing the Minister advice on is advice in relation to specific countries or negotiations.
So the priorities were set then as at 1 December. I think we can all conclude that to be the case, regardless of whether the department's advice had or had not been accepted. There hasn't been a need for the department to provide further iterations of briefs or recommendations setting priorities to the Minister.
No, Senator. However, I would note, of course, we set our priorities for the year, and from time to time additional issues may come up. We may be approached by a country that we hadn't considered as a priority, those sorts of issues. So we may a priorities list would have set a broad set of priorities with a caveat that if there are changes in circumstances, we might provide advice in relation to additional countries.
Okay. When the department signed off on the brief of 4 January in relation to the Qatar request, was its approach consistent with the priorities as agreed and set by the Minister on the 1st of December?
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking through your question, Senator. So you're asking, was an approach to negotiate other countries consistent with with Qatar? I think you said specifically consistent with that approach. I think that goes to the nature of the advice in that minute, Senator.
Well, again, it can only go to the nature of the advice if we knew the content of either minute, which we do not. I'm simply seeking here again to understand the department goes through a process with the Minister to agree priorities for international engagement. Then you have specific cases that you assess. Surely your advice on those specific cases is consistent and reflective of the priorities that you've agreed with the Minister. Let's take that at a general level.
Yeah,
generally speaking, once you've set the priorities, is that what you actually do in engaging and recommending to the Minister?
I think, and Mr Wolf may have more to add here, but the nature of our priority setting is sort of essentially, to engage with a country, is it a high, medium or low, doesn't go necessarily to the nature or the outcome of that engagement.
Right. Mr Wolf's signed off on the brief of the 4th of January. This is a decision brief for the Minister as to whether or not negotiations or consultations should be entered into with Qatar.
Yes, Senator. Essentially it's an approach. We call it a mandate, but it's an approach as to how we should engage with that particular country.
So it is response to their request, how we are going to respond, and these are the terms of negotiating mandate that would be taken forward under that response.
Essentially, yes.
Yep. And negotiating mandate will look at what Australia's priorities are. Qatar, as we know, asked for 28 additional flights. You might be, in any circumstances, not that application particularly, but in negotiating mandate you might be saying, well, we think based on our consultations that a lesser number, a greater number might be in Australia's interest, that we should negotiate these regional provisions, that the type of safeguard arrangement put in place by Minister McCormack could be a feature. All of those sorts of different things might form the content of a negotiating mandate.
That's correct, and an important issue for Australia, of course, is also traffic rights, which is the ability to run Fifth Freedom services beyond a point. Those are considerations that are important for Australia as well. I'm not saying that's a case in this specific incident, but those are the sorts of things that get taken into account in Australia's bilateral negotiations, yes.
Would you sometimes simply put up a decision brief that said, we think it's a bad idea, no need for a negotiating mandate?
There are certainly circumstances where it may not be appropriate for Australia to enter into negotiations at a particular time for a particular reason, yes.
Okay. So it is telling, very telling, I think, that the department put up a brief for a negotiating mandate to the minister in January of this year. It does suggest that the request should enter into a negotiations phase. Having put that brief to the minister in January of this year, which I note is consistent with what the Virgin CEO told us yesterday, that when she met with Minister King on the 20th of January, she expected a negotiating mandate to be released the following week. So Minister King had the brief for a week or two by that time, and obviously was figuring she'd be in a position to sign it off within the following week, consistent, it would seem, with about the same timeline that she dealt with the international priorities brief. Were you expecting a response from the minister by the end of January?
Senator, we expect a response when the minister's made a decision. I don't think we'd put a particular time. Different decisions will take different times relating to what priorities the minister may have if a minister feels that they need to consult more broadly range of factors. So we don't have a particular expectation. There's no sort of legislative time frame that we need to meet here. So it's not a not a matter of expectation on our behalf.
When did you get that minute back from the minister?
We received it. Well, we understand that. Oh, sorry, we know the decision was the minute was signed by the minister on the 10th of July, and we received it back formally through our systems on the 13th of July.
So 6 months later in this case, you got the minute back from the minister. Did it agree a negotiating mandate?
I think the minister has clearly said that negotiations were. Well, sorry, the minister has clearly indicated that the capacity was not to be agreed at this time.
Did you ever enter into negotiations?
I think that's a technical question.
It is, so I'd like a technical answer.
That's why you're at the
Qatar has
table.
made a request. So I guess you could, depending on your point of view, you could argue that's a commencement of negotiation.
Did you ever? Are they called under the treaty and the agreement? Are they called negotiations or consultations? What exactly is Qatar requesting to enter into?
I would need to see the exact. When I can check this in the.
Okay,
letter.
but there is a word. Let's call it negotiations, can we? Okay.
Yeah. So
Right.
there is a consultations clause which can be where parties can formally ask for one, and I can't remember whether the word consultations or negotiations was referred to in that letter. But it's essentially, in this instance, it's essentially.
Did we
the
ever
same
enter
thing.
into those engagements with Qatar under the technical clause?
Yeah. So traditionally what has happened, Senator, is where air services negotiations commence, there is a formal 2-day process where you get people in a room like this and have a formal negotiation. In recent times, these have tended to be much more informally done through correspondence or through virtual meetings. However, in this instance, we did not have a formal engagement with Qatar or with the Qatar authorities or through a video conference.
It's a long way of saying no.
No.
That there were not negotiations or consultations to proceed beyond Qatar's request.
That's correct, Senator. Yeah.
Right. So, Chair, I appreciate that you are wrapping me up.
We can come back, Senator Birmingham.
One just last particular point. Between sending the minute to the minister, the minute dated 4th of January, and the minister not agreeing to the negotiating mandate in her decision on the minute of 10th of July, did the department provide any further minutes or revised recommendations or revised negotiating mandate to the minister during that 6-month period?
No, Senator. I think the only engagement we had was to ask, has a decision been made as yet? Yeah.
Not an unreasonable question.
Been there for 6 months.
And you had stakeholders who were asking you that question too, I'm sure.
Yes, there would have been stakeholder interest in that.
Okay.
We'll follow that. Have we got any advice on who the acting Minister for Infrastructure and Transport is?
Yes, it's
Yeah, and then we're going straight to you, Senator Sheldon. No, that's the only... just on the way to you, Senator Sheldon. Ms Purvis-Smith said that wouldn't be a hard thing to find out.
Minister McBain, Senator.
Minister McBain is the acting Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development Minister. Thank you. Senator Sheldon, you have the call.
Good, thanks. One of the matters that has been raised, and you may have been following this, is the 2018 decision by then Minister McCormick. Usually in about 5 minutes I'll start getting interrupted from those on my right-hand side, so we'll just grin and bear and then I'll ask you the question again. But the last time the Qatar-Australia Air Services Agreement was amended, I understand that Qatar first submitted its request to the Australian Government in 2018. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's correct.
Yeah. So when was the decision made to increase air rights?
It was in December
2021.
Yeah. So does it normally take, well, certainly nearly 4 years for a decision like this to be made?
I think it's fair to say, Senator, it can range depending on bilateral to bilateral. Some are very complex and difficult. Requires, of course, both sides to reach an agreement. Others can be more straightforward.
So we've had comments from the opposition this morning saying that there's good ministerial standards by having matters dealt with in a short period of time, but the reality is some can be dealt with in a short period of time and some can't be. So if the standard that the opposition's applying to the McCormick decision, then that's not a good ministerial standard. Is that an appropriate comment in this case, or is it the reality you have a different view about the process that applied here?
I think that's a matter of opinion, Senator. I don't think we could respond to that.
Right. Well, can I then go back to the question? Is that some matters could take years, some matters could take months. That's a matter of the complexity of the negotiations of the bilaterals, etc.
That's correct, Senator, and indeed some negotiations go over many years. There are countries who we've sought additional rights in more than a decade ago who we've been unable to secure rights with.
So the point is there's a complexity, unlike has been described by those in the opposition, there's a complexity to the negotiations of these bilateral agreements.
There is a complexity to these negotiations, Senator. We wish it was a more straightforward process. However, it's an international negotiation.
Well, then going to this, does it normally take, in the case of the Qatar-Australia negotiations and specifically the 2018 matter, does it normally take 4 years? Is that a regular event?
I think, Senator, there was a submission made by the Qatar CAA, which has got a very detailed rundown of discussions between Australia and Qatar. I wouldn't like to comment on every aspect of that timeline because that's an interpretation by another government. However, broadly, that reflects the history of those negotiations, and you can see that they have been very intermittent in nature, if I could characterise it that way. Dating back to, I think, 2003 was when the first bilateral air service agreement was agreed with Qatar.
So I'm not quite clear about, with your answer about why it took so long.
Well, Senator, I think we do have to include the COVID factor. Basically, bilateral air service negotiations were suspended.
I appreciate that we can talk about complexity, but I'm holding up a mobile phone. There's, there's electronic. We're talking about aviation where people are working often in different parts of the world. Like it's not. If there's an area that would be more connected regardless of not being physically connected in a room.
Oh yes, and I'm not talking about having physical or face-to-face contacts during COVID. In essence, countries around the world.
Some would argue that for some areas and some departments it would actually be with their not to say that that it wasn't a particularly diabolical period for this country and the world, but when you're talking about work time and the amount of work that's going across somebody's desk, in some circumstances it would actually be less. So we're not talking about you've now got a lot more work to do. You've actually got probably considerably less work to do, so there's more capacity to actually interchange, isn't there?
I think, Senator, that's not actually correct in this instance because the area that looks after our international bilateral relationships under Mr Wolf's leadership, it's a small team. They also do the timetable approvals and regulatory approvals, and due to the passenger caps that were in place through the COVID period, the workload of that area actually exponentially increased. We were doing, normally we do timetables essentially twice a year during the northern winter and northern summer and some variations. During that period we were making, at some times dozens a day.
So there wasn't so the then government didn't give you extra resources to deal with those complexities of the workload then?
The aviation area of the department more generally was certainly expanded. It went from one division to two.
I'm going to this issue you just raised me as the reasons why it took nearly 4 years. And you said that, and I put to you that it's actually quieter, and you legitimately said, no, this is actually how the workload worked. We're under considerably more workload. In that particular area, where there's considerable more workload, was there extra staff put in that area to deal with that workload?
We juggled staff at different times. I think the point is...
you made a point to me to defend
yes, Senator,
the amount of time.
Yeah. So did we apply more resources to that area? Yes. Did we apply resources to bilateral aviation negotiations specifically? There was no inclination for bilateral negotiations by any of our partners globally. I shouldn't say no, a strongly reduced inclination for bilateral negotiations because people internationally were very much focused on keeping afloat, dealing with COVID. Yeah.
So even 4 years doesn't seem like a long time to you in that circumstance. I counter to that, and that is that there's fewer bilaterals being discussed. This is one that's being discussed. So there again. When you're looking at the number of bilaterals that you're doing on workload, that there is a capacity to actually have those discussions. Isn't that a logical conclusion?
It took a number of years to reach a conclusion to those negotiations. Did that take longer than expected? I think that's really a matter of opinion and speculation, but it certainly took, 3.5, 4 years to reach conclusion on that agreement.
And that's longer than usual, though, isn't
it? Again, depends on the specific circumstances, but it is a long period of time, yes.
Now, I just want to... When did the department provide the advice to the then Minister in relationship to the request about the change of the... when there was the last time that the service agreement was amended, what was the timeline for the then Minister?
Broadly, Senator, the then Minister signed off on the department commencing discussions with Qatar in July 2018.
So it's been widely reported this agreement also included an anti-dumping measure. So between the first decision to approve, which took how long to make that decision?
The exact detail, it took a few months, but I think we should call it the anti-competitive provision, just to give it its correct title. It's a safeguarding mechanism. It was a condition attached to seeking an agreement on the Qatar request for an additional 7 services.
So there was just so I'm clear on the question, the question that I'm asking and that you're answering. The first decision to give approval, and then there was a subsequent decision, wasn't there, where there was additional arrangements required?
Yes, seeking the anti-competitive provision to be placed in the memorandum of understanding between the two countries.
Right. Now, the first provision was approved. How long did it take for that to be overturned with a different amendment?
Senator, I'll check that for you, but I think there was, we are getting a bit into the nature of advice to the previous government, but the actual decision to agree to have talks with Qatar was in July 2018.
Right. Now, there was a period where there was an agreement given to, there was an approval process where there was an approval given to Qatar being, which has been pretty much formally in the public arena. There was an agreed period when the Qatar arrangements were, bilaterals were, one, a letter sent to say that everything's hunky-dory, let's go ahead, and then it's been said that there was only 1 week later there'd been changes made to that arrangement.
Senator, I wouldn't want to get into speculation about the nature of advice provided by the department.
I'm not asking you to say the nature of the advice, but there was, you're saying that the anti-dumping arrangements, which you've already given evidence on, the anti-dumping arrangements was given some days later. It's been suggested it's a week later that there was a further amendment given on what the changes should be for that particular.
Yeah, Senator, I can only talk about what was actually agreed in terms of what the discussions subsequently that took place with Qatar was, and that was, as I said, in July 2018.
So you can't tell us when the anti-dumping measures were put in after the initial agreement?
No, the 2018 was to give, to seek to put the anti-competitive provision in the agreement. And that was a condition of agreeing to the 7 services a week. And that's what was the subsequent basis of negotiation between the two aviation authorities.
There was a question put to you before about advice given to Minister King on and whether it changed on Qatar. Was there advice that was given to Mr McCormick on this matter where there was a change of advice?
I'd have to check that one for you, Senator. I'm aware, as I said in July, that the Minister agreed to the department going away and talking to the Qatar CAA about that proposal.
Now, I expect you've read the QCAA's submission. They indicate that in April 2018, you have read the QCAA's submission?
It's very lengthy, Senator, but I have read it, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Wolf. And thanks for your preparation on today's hearing with going through that very lengthy Qatari government submission. They indicated that in April 2018, the Qatari government was first informed that Australia had agreed to a deal. Then a week later, that letter was rescinded with an additional clause added. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can't speak to it too much, Senator. I wasn't there at the time, but my understanding was that there had been negotiations between the two countries, but the finalisation of any agreement, of course, requires a signed document, and that a draft was sent, and then I was aware of the fact that subsequent to that, after the draft had been sent, the request for an anti-competitive provision was made by Australia.
So we've got a draft sent. This is the proposal. A draft being waiting for two parties for the other party, one or both parties to sign that document. And then there's a further
request from Australia.
A further request from Australia after that, changing the original draft.
Yes.
Is that usual to have that situation happen within a week? Particularly with something quite as dramatic as this, anti-dumping is not a frivolous. Sorry, we sort of dot the I here and cross the T there. This is a substantial change.
Yeah, no, I should indicate, Senator, that we do have similar provisions in other agreements. For example,
my question goes to: was a change like that when there's a draft given, and within a week a substantial change is then put to the other party, such as anti-dumping?
Governments from both countries, Senator, do have the right to put in rendition requests.
I'm not asking about rights.
So I think it'd be asking me for an opinion as about whether this is a regular feature.
No, it's asking about regularity. That's not an opinion. This is either regular or it's not regular.
Senator, all I could say is it does happen.
And when was the other occasions that that's happened?
I can check for you, Senator, but during the course of before a MOU between two countries is finalised, changes can be made.
That's not the question I'm asking. You give me an answer to a different. You give me an answer to a different question.
Yeah.
I'm asking you. You've said that you've put to this committee that this can regularly happen, or it does happen. I'm asking you, when has it happened on previous occasions? Because I'm putting to you that it's irregular. Not that it hasn't ever happened before, but it's irregular. And
Senator, I think I can certainly say that it doesn't happen often.
Right. Did the department provide advice? So I might just go to this. Qatar. Why was Qatar different to other nations, and where was the similarities with anti-dumping measures elsewhere?
The clause talks about anti-competitive behaviour by airlines of both countries. I should stress that, and it's in relation to things such as fares and the way of operations. And as I said, it's normally associated with the tariff article in our air services agreements, and we have one, for example, with United Arab Emirates.
So did the department provide advice for this provision to be inserted, or did the advice come from somewhere else?
The department sought the minister's approval to pursue anti-competitive provisions in the bilateral agreement.
So the advice came from the department to the minister?
Came from the department, but of course we consult with stakeholders, particularly our airlines, who obviously are representative in that agreement.
Righto. So airlines made a representation to the department to have an anti-dumping arrangement in place.
Airlines were consulted.
Righto. So was the insertion of the anti-dumping provisions a request from airlines?
I'd have to check that for you, Senator, but I know they supported the provision being inserted.
Righto. And so you've said that there's advice given by the department to the minister, that airlines have made submissions about what should be inserted. We've got a draft which doesn't include anti-dumping, and in 1 week's period that changes. The draft and the department makes a further submission to the minister. Which airline made the request for there not to be anti-dumping during that intervening period?
Senator, I think Mr Wolfe said there were consultations with airlines, not necessarily a request from airlines. I think that's an important distinction in language there, but
yeah.
Let Mr Wolfe answer the question.
I don't think there's a distinction. If an airline's making a request, an airline doesn't come to you and say, "Oh, by the way, we're having this vague conversation. Here is a request of what we seek."
Yeah, sorry, Senator.
They've requested anti-dumping provisions, and a week later, the anti-dumping provisions all of a sudden appear contrary to the early draft.
Yeah, Senator, I would agree if that was the case. My clarification was I'm not sure if that's what Mr Wolfe actually said.
Yeah, Senator, I'm happy to check for you in terms of it, but it's obviously appropriate that we run any such provisions past our airlines because it's going to apply to them as well.
So well, then I'll say it this way: there's the draft is sent to the minister. There's a discussion with the airlines in an interceding period of that week. As there had been previous consultations and previous discussions, requests from airlines. The airlines have a position regarding anti-dumping, and then there's a provision put in contrary to what the original draft was.
It's not contrary, Senator, it's actually additional to.
All right. In addition, which makes a in my view, a substantial change to that original draft. A draft that was sent on the basis of the parties reaching agreement, a draft no longer being a draft once it's actually physically signed. So there's, that's, and we've got the airlines making a submission, a request. I gather they didn't like the draft.
The airlines?
Yes. They weren't satisfied with the draft. Is that the way? But it might be a better way of saying it.
I think I wouldn't. They certainly had views on it, as I understand, Senator. Yes.
Righto. Well, when they had views, was the view that they agreed with the draft or they disagreed with the draft?
I think we're now getting to the point of what confidential advice we might have received from the airlines, but I think the important thing at the end of the day is that it's up to the department and the government in this particular instance to put forward the draft on behalf of the Australian government as to what we believe the provision should be. We take into account clearly the airlines' views, but ultimately this is a government-to-government document.
Was there two airlines that were actually disagreeing, or was there one airline disagreeing with the draft?
I'm pretty sure there was only one airline involved at that time operating in that space.
Which is that one?
Sorry, Senator?
Which airline was that?
That'd be Qantas.
So we've got Minister McCormick, and this is my assessment. You may be restrained on what you can and can't say about this. I'm not asking for an opinion, but you may factually correct anything that I'm about to say, is that we've got a draft arrangement that has been sent off. Obviously the intent is for that to be signed, which makes it no longer draft. In the space of a week, we have one player, in this case Qantas, that wasn't satisfied with that draft, wanted anti-dumping provisions in there, amongst potentially other things, and then the draft has changed under Minister McCormick.
Senator, I won't go through the sort of exact who's who, but the bottom line is the department who ultimately, with the approval of the government, sent the proposed anti-competitive clause to Qatar.
So why was there an insertion of a clause in the first place? Were you concerned that Qatar may engage in anti-competitive dumping behaviour?
Senator, I think this might start to get into advice to a previous government, which we can't divulge.
Well, I can say this. It just seems to me that if there's concern about anti-competitive behaviour and dumping behaviour, then clearly you were.
So as we've mentioned, these are treaties, and you have gone through a process, and Qatar has outlined the process from their end. They are negotiations, and you've gone through the timeline process, but going into I think much further detail will start to divulge advice to previous government and negotiations and negotiating mandates from previous governments.
Now, Brisbane Airport also said that they recall something similar occurring in 2018. And that they raised this concern about the impression that a deal had been signed, or certainly was imminent, and only that for it to fall through within a week. Was there any contact made to Brisbane Airport letting them know that there'd been a deal signed or pending a draft that was being proposed to be signed that was later to fall through?
Yeah, I think, Senator, we'd need to take that on notice. None of the officers here were party to those talks. We were all in different roles at that time, so we'd need to check our records. I'm not aware of anything, but we don't have specific knowledge of that. So I should check with Mr. Wolf, but I'm confident.
We can check, Senator, but it would not normally be the case that during the course of sensitive negotiations with another country that would be sharing that with Brisbane Airport.
So when it fell through, and I appreciate you've taken that on notice as well, so there'll be additional information available to the committee. When the deal fell through, was Brisbane Airport consulted? Might work backwards.
Yeah, I think
I think we'd take that on notice.
I think we'll take that on notice, Senator. But
It's getting to a level of detail on that we'd have to go back and check our records in detail, and we're happy to take that on notice for you.
I think Mr Wolf was about to give me an answer.
Oh yeah, no. I was just indicating, Senator, that given the fact that negotiations were ongoing, I wouldn't have thought that we would have been going out and telling stakeholders about the fact that where things we're still actually negotiating for, as I understand it, over a period of time. So I'm not sure we would have been giving
a mind to approve the brief, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Now, on the air services agreement consultation process, how would you describe the consultation process that took place under the former government?
I think, Senator, they were very similar to those that exist today. It's a pretty long established process. The specific numbers, whether it's 57 or 53 or whatever it is, entities would be right, but the approach we have taken is essentially the same.
Yeah, thank you. And you've given that evidence earlier too. What was the ACCC consulted?
Senator, no. We tend to go to Treasury as the agency that has got policy responsibility for competition rather than the ACCC. We do engage with the ACCC on specific issues from time to time, or indeed they engage with us on issues from time to time. It tends to be more at the policy end in terms of setting our overarching policy approach. Of course, the government recently released the Aviation Green Paper, which has got a chapter on our approach to international aviation, which is fairly similar to the approach of previous governments, and the ACCC was, of course, consulted through the Aviation White Paper process.
In those circumstances, they're consulted. And the last white paper,
it tends to be on
was
higher level policy issues as opposed to specific bilateral arrangements.
And the last white paper, as we know, was in 2009, before the previous government's reign. What about the Productivity Commission and consultations? The normal process on this day-to-day. It's been suggested through the inquiry that the ACCC gets consulted blow by blow. There's consultation with the Productivity Commission blow by blow. Does the Productivity Commission get consulted? And were they consulted by the former government?
Senator, I might just ask Mr Wolf if there's anything to add, but typically the Productivity Commission, as I understand it, focuses on specific inquiries. We wouldn't necessarily go to the Productivity Commission unless there's an inquiry underway. The Productivity Commission has, of course, looked into international air services arrangements in the past, most significantly back in 1998. I think they also had another look in 2015, I think. But I think I'll just check with Mr Wolf if there's any specific...
And certainly, Senator, we're aware of the Productivity Commission's views and the ACCC's views about broader competition principles.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's been the former government's normal practice has been the ongoing practice of the department to date.
Yes, Senator.
Yes, Senator.
What about the secondary gateway airports? Did the Minister or the Department consult Canberra Airport, Adelaide Airport or Darwin Airport regarding the decision in 2018? Or more generally?
I'll check that for you, Senator. As I said, the nature of our consultation process would be similar, I suspect. Broader priorities, the large list of stakeholders that we've provided to the committee, the specific airline negotiation rights would normally be with the airlines.
Senator, if I could add to that answer, Adelaide Airport and Canberra Airport and Cairns Airport are on the list of people, and Hobart Airport as well, of entities that we consult with, as well as the Airports Association of Australia. Darwin Airport, I think you asked about, is not. I
think the Senator was asking about 2018.
Oh, sorry,
2018. 2018.
Sorry, my apologies, Senator. But I think the
former government's approach to doing it.
We'll check for you, Senator.
Yeah. Sorry, Mr Wood. I'm not sure, Mr Wolf, whether you were just going to add anything to that about the former government's process of consulting with the secondary airports such as Canberra, Adelaide and Darwin?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it would have been similar, Senator, but we'll check for you.
I just want to go back to this is extremely concerning information about this week period in 2018. I'm just trying to get to this is I'm using my language. It's not a regular practice to change something around such a short period of time. During that period when the deal was on, then off again, that there was a draft waiting for signature, and then it came off again, and in my language, a substantial change put in regarding anti-dumping. Was there any changes in staff in the senior levels in Mr McCormick's office?
I don't think I could answer that one, Senator.
Are you aware that there was are you aware whether there was a change of the Chief of Staff in the Minister's office?
No, as Mr Wood indicated, we weren't actually on deck at 2018, Senator.
Have you been following the hearings that we've been holding here?
Yes, certainly have been, Senator.
And you're aware that there's been a series of questions about the 2018 decision-making process?
Yes, certainly about the process, but as in relation to individual personnel in Minister McCormack's office, no, haven't followed that.
So you're not aware that in all that evidence and some of that controversy that it was discussed that the Chief of Staff of Mr McCormack's office had changed?
No, but I don't think that would have changed my advice, Senator.
And I'm going to then to the question of Minister McCormack's office, that the Minister made a decision about the change regarding the anti-dumping, and we've ascertained that airlines, and one, Qantas, had an interest specifically in this matter. An ex-executive of Qantas becomes the Chief of Staff in Mr McCormack's office. It appears to me that this is the smoking gun that we've all been looking for on this committee. There has been a direct influence by a Minister's office in a decision involving Qantas.
I would suggest not the only one. Have you finished, Senator Sheldon, or you got more
for
questions?
the moment I have.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, officials. I just want to go to some evidence we received from Perth Airport that they were surprised that they were a part of the request from Qatar, but nobody had got in contact with them. And I see from the list of 57, sorry, I should have put, they're on the list of 57, and I just want to understand how the department provides comprehensive advice to your minister around these types of decisions when we've got key players who have strong views about this stuff, as we've discovered in this inquiry, that you weren't able to provide to the minister in your advice?
Senator, Perth Airport provided input to our international priorities,
Yep.
and while I can't go to the details of their submission, they, I believe, provided...
Well, they were pretty forward-leaning when we were there last week. You will have read their Hansard. I'm sure you're all tuning in.
Yes, Senator, I
I
read the Hansard.
Yeah.
I know Matt and Stephanie very well. We're very good.
So whilst you won't go to the details of their submission, they were pretty forward-leaning
Yeah, and Senator,
their views.
That was the comment I was going to. We're very clearly aware of the views of Perth Airport. I believe that they expressed those in their response to the broader priorities document. So we're certainly well aware that Perth, along with I think most airports, well, I think the evidence has come through this committee of their views.
So my question, though, remains, Mr Wood, in giving the Minister King advice about Qatar Airways' request, why did you only go to Qantas and Virgin and not the four impacted airports?
So, Senator, I'd refer to my earlier comments that because of the timing of that, so soon after going out to our on the priorities, because the views of airports in relation to priorities were quite clear.
And what were those? What was the flavour?
Well, I think airports have made that clear through their...
Well, I'm asking you, Mr Wood, what was the flavour of their response to additional capacity?
Yeah.
Were they in favour of it, Mr Wood?
Senator, as I've indicated, I don't want to go to the specifics of their input. However, I think it's clear that the airports around Australia are in favour of getting additional airlines operating to their ports.
And you didn't think that was important information for the Minister to know in terms of her...
Senator, as I've indicated, we have included in our advice to the Minister a summary of input from stakeholders. Yes.
So we can assume, given this inquiry got set up, we're actually able to get that information from the airports, who are all supportive of Qatar Airways' application or request. They've made that very public and very clear, even if you won't, and your Minister has got the shroud of secrecy over the department. You can't say that, but they've come to this committee and been very public about that, which makes it completely ironic that you are here saying we can't let you know what the airports have said, when the airports have sat in the very chair you're in and told this committee they're supportive of Qatar Airways' request. Do you understand how ridiculous this is now becoming?
Senator, if I could be clear, we are well aware of the view of the airports. We engage with them on a regular basis informally as well, and of course we hear their views in relation to air services generally. I think the default summary position of all airports in Australia is they would like to have as many airlines operating there as possible.
Yeah. Fine, but you can't go to the submissions. If the airports or your 57 consultees were happy for their submission to the department to become public, would you still be claiming public interest immunity over these documents?
Senator, it's the Minister claiming public interest immunity in relation to these.
Ms Purvis-Smith, do you believe the Minister would still be claiming public interest immunity over documents that the authors of those documents are happy to be made public?
I can't speak for the Minister. That would be a decision for the Minister, Senator.
What conversations has the department had with Qantas about FOIs that have come around this issue? We heard from Qantas last night. They're quite in regular contact with you about FOIs from my office, but also from the media more generally, trying to get to the bottom of this issue.
Senator, if I could make some general comments, and Mr Wolf, who's been the decision maker in
Mr Wolf, finally
of
something got released and your name's on it, so I'm looking forward to catching up with you about that.
But freedom of information is through a very formal process. We do essentially a document search to identify what issues might be in scope. We then, where there is a need, as provided for under the FOI Act, where there is a need to engage with third-party stakeholders, we do that. That's done through a freedom of information team separate to the decision maker. We have a centralised unit in our corporate area.
Yes, I understand. So Qantas ran us through that you give them a call, you say, are you happy for this to be released or not? Now, Mr Wolf, you're nodding. You're the subject. I would love you to enlighten me, please.
Yes, certainly,
Because
Senator.
I'm a little frustrated from my FOI. It drives me nuts.
Yes, Senator. Obviously, the decision in relation to FOI takes into account the various aspects of the FOI Act, and in the particular FOI recently, of course, there were a number of grounds on which a couple of the documents could not be exempted. I did hear the Qantas evidence yesterday, and I did go back and check to make sure of the wording in the document, and I think I can see the issue that they've raised, which is the question about the detriment to the party providing confidential information to the department. It reads financial loss, exposure to ridicule or public criticism to the affected third party.
And the third party in this is Qantas, isn't
Correct,
it?
that's right.
So the government's claiming we're not going to release this information because it's going to make Qantas look bad.
Yeah, well, I think, yes, that's where I think it says or, and it sort of puts them all into the and or thing. They are all terms used in the Office of Australian Information Commissioner's guidelines. Those terms are used. But I suspect on transmission it might actually be better to put an extra or into the document because they're not all necessarily relevant to each of the documents. So it should really be financial loss or exposure to ridicule. So we're not actually saying that exposure to ridicule is one of the reasons for that particular
Well, especially
document.
not over the last few weeks, right?
Thank you, Senator. So, yes, I think we will probably, in an FOI clarification, put an or in between the three particular criteria.
Right, in retrospect.
Yes, because at the moment...
Because otherwise it does, wouldn't you concede, look like the government, through the department, is actually protecting Qantas's reputation.
Yeah, I think, Senator, as I said, they are terms that are used in the Australian Information Commissioner's guidelines. I think that it depends on the particular documents involved. For example, clearly airlines share with us, and this is not just Qantas, this is a range of airlines. I think Turkish Airlines, another FOI we recently sent, provide us with commercially sensitive information.
Why is it taking so long, Mr Wolfe, to get basic documents that you're able to redact any sensitive information out of? It's taking an inordinate amount of time to get those documents, not just myself. And sometimes the media and I FOI the same documents and they get more information than I do. Can you explain how the department's internal FOI processes mean the Shadow Minister gets restricted information but the media gets more?
Yeah, happy to check that for you, Senator. It may be due to the nature of the actual request.
They're the same request.
Yeah, if it's exactly the same wording, then yes, I would certainly check that for you.
Thank you. I do just want to know, DFAT, what advice did you provide Infrastructure and Transport about Qatar Airways' request?
We did not receive, Senator, any specific request from Department of Transport in terms of providing input into the decision that was needed to be made on the request by Qatar Airways. So there's no specific request from that department to our department for input into that decision.
Right. In the reasons you read out earlier, Ms Purvis-Smith, about what the Minister considered in making her decision, you didn't mention the incident at Hamad International Airport in October 2020, did you?
I didn't, Senator, and I think that the Minister has said that that was an issue of context.
Yes, I appreciate that. The Minister wrote...
She's variously said it was a fact. It wasn't a fact.
She's changed her mind a lot. The copy of the letter from the Minister for Transport to the women involved in that Doha airport incident has been made public. It was dated the 10th of July. The committee and the public have a copy of this. Was this letter drafted by the department?
It was not drafted by the department.
Was the correspondence ever submitted
For
logged into the departmental system for drafting the response?
I think the letter that came from the lawyers went into...
So the response to the Minister's letter came through your correspondence register?
The letter, the original letter...
The incoming letter?
The incoming letter that the Minister responded to and I am pretty sure, came in through to our system.
Yep. But there was...
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So the Minister didn't request the department draft a response, as would usually happen?
That's correct. The Minister, the department did not draft a response.
Did the Foreign Affairs Department have any input into the Minister's response?
Minister King's response?
Yep.
No.
Okay. If you want. Okay. That's quite incredible, actually. I'm sure we'll have some follow-up questions there. I want to just go to consultation with Qantas. We've got the brief sitting with Minister King on her desk for nigh on 6 months. One of the stakeholders you specifically consulted with, Virgin, had the sense, both from Minister King and the Prime Minister at the Australian Open, that a decision was imminent and it was going to be an agreed position. That was Virgin's evidence yesterday. 6 months later, though, it's disagreed. How many meetings, formal or formal, has the Minister or her office had with Qantas since the Qatar Airways request was received?
We're not aware of what meetings the Minister has had with Qantas.
But don't
Which meetings are you aware of?
Yeah, which meetings are you aware of? When they?
I'm not aware of any meetings that the Minister has had.
Discussions?
With Qantas?
Or discussions with Qantas.
With Virgin, if you do?
Or with Virgin.
Does the Minister request or her office request meeting briefs?
Sometimes the Minister and the office request meeting briefs. I don't believe that there have been any meeting briefs requested
for Qantas or Virgin?
For meetings with Qantas or Virgin.
I don't believe so. Certainly not in relation to the specific
No,
issue.
just any meeting.
Yeah, sorry.
For every transport departmental official at the table, are any of you aware of any meetings or discussions the Minister or her office had with Qantas between receipt of the request from Qatar and the Minister making the decision, between August last year and July this year? Each of you. We'll go one by one. So Mrs. Purvis-Smith, you're saying no?
I'm not aware of any that the Minister has had. In particular, I couldn't tell you any dates or any times.
We're going to run
Minister
through
has
the
had.
lot.
Okay. Mr Wood?
No, Senator, only what's been discussed in these hearings previously. I am aware, Senator, there was the Qantas 100th anniversary dinner, which I know the Prime Minister, it's on the public record, he was there. I'm not sure if Minister King was there. I don't think so.
What date was that?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Where was the 100-year dinner? Just remind me.
It was at the Qantas jet base, I believe.
Okay.
Mr Wolfe?
No.
Mr Vincent?
Not about Qatar. I'd have to check if we've prepared any meeting briefs over the last year, but certainly not about Qatar.
So no, Mr Vincent, my
Warner,
question wasn't about Qatar specifically.
Yep.
It was about a meeting brief. I'm trying to find out the meetings, formal or informal, that the Minister has had with Qantas or Virgin.
Yeah,
In the old days, there used to be a meeting brief sent up so that you could be
Sorry, and Ms Werner, I don't want to leave you out.
And actually, would I be able to add to my answer? I think that there were some meetings in particular with Jet Zero Council where Qantas was in attendance at the Jet Zero Council meeting, and so the Minister would have met with Qantas in relation to that.
November. I just need to ask about the 23rd of November. Was no meeting brief prepared for that meeting? Mr Vincent, Ms Werner?
Oh, can I check? So if we're talking 12 months, I wouldn't mind checking our records about...
I'd be surprised if there hasn't been.
And so just to confirm, the scope of the request is any meeting between Qantas and the Minister
Since Qatar lodged their request on August the date.
If I may, I'd like to just check the system.
Thank you. If you could get that to us as soon as possible.
Yes, Senator.
What about meetings or discussions the department has had with Richard Goyder or other directors on the Qatar Airways request?
I've not had any meetings with Richard Goyder or
Has the department had any? Your secretary?
The department has. I think the secretary may have met with as a meeting, introductory meeting, with Richard Goyder and Qantas as an introductory meeting, but it did not raise Qatar, is my understanding. I was not there, I was away at the time, but I do understand that there was an introductory meeting. Was it sorry, my apologies. I don't want to. I don't want to provide you with the wrong information.
Yeah,
Yes,
I think it was actually a meeting with Alan Joyce, the former CEO of Qantas, had an introductory meeting with the secretary late last year. But the Qatar issue was not discussed. I was actually sitting in on that meeting. It was a teleconference. It was a sort of brief half-hour introductory call.
So we've heard from former transport ministers that Qantas chair, Qantas CEO, doesn't matter who they are, have former ministers' mobiles and department secretaries on speed dial and call them at any time of the day or night. But that is a very important relationship, as Senator White said yesterday, of all governments and transport ministers historically. Do you know if is there any way that Secretary Betts, how often would he be speaking to the CEO of Qantas?
I can't speak for Secretary Betts, but I could see if we can get that information for you quickly.
Thank you.
I would not expect it to be very often.
So just on notice, given we are taking it, can you provide a full list of meetings and discussions with dates and the people involved in those discussions between departmental officers and Qantas representatives? We know we've heard evidence about the aggressive way they lobby and pursue their case, so would like to understand the nature of that.
Can I clarify the request, Senator? Are you after any meetings that we may have had?
Since the Qatar Airways request was lodged.
That raised Qatar on any issue? Thank you.
Because if I'm as bullish as Qantas is about protecting their market share, I'll use every opportunity to press my case. That's the evidence we've had. And so I just want to look at that. I just want to quickly go back to the FOI questions, please, Mr Wolf. You claimed a Section 33 exemption on a request regarding emails from Turkish Airlines. Yes? Section 33 is in relation to government authorities, and unlike Qatar Civil Aviation Authority, Turkish Airlines is not a government authority. So on what grounds have you claimed a Section 33 exemption from the Freedom of Information Act?
Senator, could I just, if I could make a comment? Mr Wolf will obviously talk about the FOI. I think the important distinction here is we don't have a relationship with Turkish Airlines. We have a relationship with the Turkish the government, the Civil Aviation Authority. There's been a lot of media talk in the media and indeed in these hearings about the Turkish airline application. Where Turkish Airline is making an application at the moment is with CASA and with the Department of Home Affairs to enable that airline to get a
It's a Turkish airline email. It's not a Turkish regulatory authority email that I'm looking for.
Sorry, I'm not talking about
what,
FOI.
yeah, Mr Wolf will be able to answer my question. Thank you so much for your assistance, Mr Wood.
Okay. Yeah, Section 33 is international relations, Senator. Is that the one? Just checking.
Well, you've claimed the Section 33.
Yep.
And that's in relation to government authorities, whereas Turkish Airlines isn't the Civil Aviation Authority, it's an actual corporate entity. The Act specifies government authorities.
I think it would have been in relation to their referencing Turkish government information in their what they provided me advice on, because they blur the difference between themselves and the government, the Turkish government.
Well, my request was around Turkish Airlines.
Yes, oh no, that's
now,
right.
Whether that's a blurred line or not, Mr Wolf.
Yep.
I'm not interested in the government authority because, correctly, freedom of information allows that to be protected and for good reason. I am interested in our FOI is very, very specific. It is about the Turkish Airlines email.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And,
so I
and
look
certainly
forward
there
to
was.
getting that.
I'll check that reasoning for you, Senator, because certainly there was information in those emails that was of a sensitive nature that they were providing to us about their commercial operations and their relationship with another government.
Was there a departmental brief done for the Neil Perry dinner here for Cabinet?
Not that I'm aware, Senator.
Mr Wood?
First I was aware of that was in the hearings yesterday, I think.
Right, okay, thank you. I've got more questions, but I will go to Senator Birmingham. Senator White or Senator
Thanks, Chair.
Sheldon?
Following up on some of the ground that the Chair's covered, did Minister King meet or speak with Mr Joyce on or around the 23rd of January this year?
I'm not aware of that. We'd have to take that on notice and ask the Minister.
Did you ask the Minister's office for such contact and information to prepare for today's hearing?
We spoke to the office in relation to the questions and that we were expected to answer.
And I think it was pretty obvious.
We've not received.
It was pretty obvious that there were going to be questions about interactions between Minister King and Mr Joyce. So did the Ministerial Office refuse to provide those details to you?
We don't yet have any information on the contact that Minister King and the officers may have had.
So you've been left in the uncomfortable position of the fact that the Minister's Office has closed down in terms of providing details to you of when the Minister actually engaged with Mr Joyce or Qantas generally. So they don't seem, as a matter of routine, to ask for information briefs, meeting briefs to prepare the Minister for such engagements. They keep the diary secret from the department, even in terms of when those meetings or discussions might occur. And then even when it's been foreshadowed that you're coming to a Senate committee and you're going to be asked when the Minister met with Mr Joyce, the Minister's Office hasn't provided you with the details. Is that correct?
I think those questions need to be asked to the Minister and her office.
Well, I would welcome the Minister to sit where you're sitting, Mrs Purvis-Smith. That would be a very helpful opportunity to perhaps get to the bottom of these issues. In the meantime, I'm particularly focused on this time frame, on or around the 23rd of January. Because it was, we know from the transparency of the Virgin CEO, Ms Herdlicker, that on the 20th of January she spoke with Minister King. And on the 20th of January she said that Minister King had told her the negotiation mandate would be released the following week. The negotiation mandate that your department had properly prepared and provided to the Minister earlier that month in January of this year. We also know from Ms Herdlicker that Minister King had indicated she understood Mr Joyce was unhappy and had asked to speak with her, and she expected that meeting to happen the following Monday. That would be Monday the 23rd of January 2023. The department has no awareness as to whether that meeting or discussion took place. Is that your evidence?
I'm not aware that that discussion took place. We've said that we will double check for you in our systems as to whether any meeting briefs, but we're not aware that a meeting brief was.
Mr Wolfe, a meeting brief for November the 23rd.
Right, January the 23rd was my question.
Oh, yours. I'm coming to November. Just, sorry. My apologies. I was triggered by the 23. That'll give you some time.
Right. Can we have your officials who are watching this ask the Minister's Office now as to whether there was such a discussion or meeting on or around the 23rd of January 2023 between Minister King and Mr Joyce?
We will see what we can do.
I would like you to ask, and I would like there to be a response, and I might keep coming up with other questions to have to ask the department until we get a response this morning.
A little bit of stick.
So let's see what the Minister's office can provide by way of response in relation to what appears to be a pretty critical juncture. You had provided a brief to the Minister that included a negotiating mandate that would have taken it to the next step, would have taken Qatar's request into negotiations that would, in most circumstances, lead to the approval of more flights. Minister King had received it, acknowledged it, said to the Virgin CEO she expected it to be released, to be signed off and publicly released in the next couple of weeks, and that the only resistance was Qantas. And she was having that conversation with Qantas. And what we want to know is, did that conversation occur? Because if it did, we appear to have gone from a situation where the Minister thought she was going to sign it off in the space of the next week or two and publicly release it, to one where it lingered for the next 6 months with no request to the department for further information, no further analysis provided by the department, seemingly nothing provided by any other Department of State or government agency, and the Minister at the end of that drawn-out 6-month period sends it back rejected. So something happened at that point in time, and that is a critical juncture. So I hope that we can get that transparency from the Ministerial Office in terms of that particular meeting. Of course, we also ask on notice for all of the engagements, as Senator McKenzie has, between Qantas and the Minister or the Ministerial Office, and the Office being critical for that as well. So agreeing to take that, understand the urgency of the specific I'm requesting, but also then all details of engagement with the Minister and the Ministerial Office between Qantas and the Office or the Minister during the life of consideration of Qatar's request.
Yes, I do, Senator. In relation to the timing, I think I have asked some people to reach out to see what we can do in the time frame here in relation to your specific request of the 23 January meeting, and we will also take on notice more generally all discussions and meetings with Qantas at departmental and ministerial level.
Thanks. Thank you, Mrs Purvis-Smith. I appreciate that, and I hope that the Ministerial Office won't be putting you in a difficult position by not coming back. I've got no doubt that there are staff sitting just metres from where we are who have access to the Minister's diary and records of such meetings and could respond very, very quickly if the Albanese government wants to be the virtue of transparency that it promised to be, but to date is failing to be in relation to this type of issue. Mr Judge, just to confirm on some other matters, you indicated before the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and I think this is consistent with what Infrastructure and Transport said, was not consulted in relation to the Department's preparation or advice in relation to Qatar's request.
That's right. There was no direct request made by that department to our department in relation to that request.
Okay. Is that unusual? Your department is responsible for the relations between our countries. It's responsible for maximising trade flows. It's responsible for tourism policy. Why would you not be consulted in terms of any relevant information on such a request?
Well, Senator, I don't know why we were not consulted in that sense in terms of a direct request. I mean, we offer foreign affairs and trade perspectives if requested. This occasion, there was no direct request made to us. So I'm not sure why there was no direct request made.
Has Qatar been a useful and helpful partner to Australia, particularly during COVID-19 and also other crises such as the fall of Kabul?
Yes, Senator. The Qatari government has been helpful to Australia in the fall of Afghanistan and also during COVID with charter flights and assisting Australians to get home.
So we have reason to be grateful for that type of assistance being provided?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Was DFAT asked by Minister Wong at any stage or Minister Farrell at any stage for any advice or information relevant to the request from Qatar to expand air services between our countries?
Yes, Senator.
DFAT was asked by
Minister Wong's office.
By Minister Wong's office. And when were you asked by Minister Wong's office for advice?
In terms of the request by Qatar Airways and the decision that was going to be made by Minister King in January of this year, on the 19th of January, the Foreign Minister's office asked us to provide input into a request that had been made by the Department of Transport and through Minister King's office to Minister Wong's office for advice from DFAT.
Okay, so I just want to be clear. Minister Wong's office on the 19th of January asked DFAT for advice in relation to a request from Minister King's office for information from Minister Wong about infrastructure's brief.
Yes.
So the departments never spoke, but the ministerial officers did.
Well, in this case, there was no direct, as I said, my earlier evidence, we were not asked directly by the department, we were asked through Foreign Minister Wong's office.
Thank you. Was there any particular context for that request coming from the Foreign Minister?
I don't know if I can describe a particular context. It's my understanding is that the office, Minister Wong's office, reached out to the team in the Middle East and Africa Division to ask for some advice related to this request. I can't characterise it as whether there was any particular context to it. It was just in relation to the Qatar request, and we were asked as the Bilateral Division to provide some advice in relation to that.
Was this one of those more formal processes? Oftentimes, I recall as a minister, you've got the decision that you've got to make, but the request is there to consult with other ministers, and so you sign, 5, 10 different letters to other ministerial colleagues asking for their opinions on the decision you're about to make. Was it one of those, shall we say, formal consultations between ministers, or was this a more informal request for feedback or information or any relevant information from Minister King to Minister Wong or Minister King's office to Minister Wong's office?
Well, I'm not sure in relation to how Minister King's office approached Minister Wong's office, but in terms of Minister Wong's office approaching DFAT and my division at that time, that was not through a formal submission.
There was no correspondence between the ministers?
I'm not aware of correspondence between the two ministers, but I'm aware that Minister Wong's office approached the Middle East and Africa Division for advice, and that was not through a formal submission process.
Okay. And by what means was that advice provided to Minister Wong's office?
My understanding, Senator, is that that was done through an email.
It was done through an email from the Middle East and North Africa Division.
The Middle East branch in the Middle East and Africa Division.
Middle East branch provided an email of advice to Minister Wong's office. And when was that advice provided?
That was provided on the 24th of January, Senator.
24th of Jan. Mrs. Purvis-Smith, did your department have any awareness of this exchange taking place?
The exchange between Minister
King's office and Minister Wong's office?
Those discussions were held between ministers. We were not involved or know the content of discussions.
Okay, you were not involved in the content of discussions. Were you aware until now that this exchange between ministerial officers took place?
I wasn't aware of personally I wasn't aware of the details. We were aware that discussions were happening between ministers, but not the details of those discussions or when they were happening.
Right. Was the email of 24 Jan the only provision of advice to Minister Wong in relation to this matter, Mr Chadworth?
In relation to the specific request from Qatar in terms of additional flight services into Australia, is that what you mean, Senator? Mm-hmm. The department provided some advice to the Minister about Qatar's request. The first time that this actually happened was in September of last year.
Sorry, could you just...
So you asked if there was any further communication between the department and Minister Wong's office in relation to the Qatar Air Services request issue.
Yep.
The first time that happened was in September of last year.
Okay, and what had triggered that in September of last year?
In terms of that decision, Qatar Airways request for additional air services, my understanding, Senator, is that Minister Wong's interaction with our ambassador in Doha, I think she was advised about the request by Qatar Airways, and so we provided advice to inform her of that.
Okay, so that was at that point, the normal course of engagements or discussions.
In the course of the engagement with our ambassador in Doha at the time, she was transiting through Doha and had a conversation with our ambassador there, and so advice was provided in that context.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So advice in that context in September last year, advice as a result of ministerial engagements on the 24th of January this year. Anything else?
No, Senator. The next time that we had any interaction about this issue was when we heard on the 12th of July that Minister King had made a decision in relation to the request by Qatar Airways.
So DFAT learnt of the decision on the 12th of July?
Yes.
Before the Prime Minister.
Before the Prime Minister?
A day before the Prime Minister.
According to his statements. What did DFAT do upon learning of the decision on the 12th of July?
The division, my understanding is that they spoke to the Minister's office. We received an email about Minister King's letter to Mark Lawyers, and then following that, a letter from Department of Transport, I think it was from Mr Wolf, was sent to the Qatar Civil Aviation Authority on the 14th of July, explaining the decision to not accept their request. And so we were informed of that, and that letter had been sent on the 14th of July via an email by Mr Wolf to the head of the Qatar Civil Aviation Authority. Okay.
So you, DFAT was aware and helped Department of Transport in terms of advice or engagement, or at least coordination of response to Qatar Transport Authority, government-to-government relations there being the appropriate domain for DFAT?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And that occurred between on the 14th of July, 2 days after DFAT became aware, but also that's 4 days, is it, after the Minister had actually made the decision on the 10th of July?
Well, in terms of making the decision, I defer to my colleagues.
I'm just double checking that I've got that.
The Minister made the decision on the 10th of July.
The Minister made the decision on the 10th of July. When did the Department of Transport learn of the Minister making the decision?
I think we received a phone call alerting us to the decision on the same day as the decision being made, and the paperwork made its way back to the department on the 13th of July.
The Minister made the decision on the 10th. Department learned of the decision on the 10th. Department of Transport contacts DFAT on the 12th, and Qatar finally gets told on the 14th of July by the government's timeline. Now, amidst that, there was the correspondence with Mark Lawyers. DFAT's role in relation to the reply to that correspondence, did DFAT have any role?
We did not provide any input into that response by Minister King to Mark Lawyers.
But there was, DFAT is aware that there was contact between Minister King's office and Minister Wong's office?
Yes, Senator.
Yes?
Because
Okay.
we were advised about the decision through Minister Wong's office, who advised us about the letter that Minister King was sending to Mark Lawyers.
Okay. Was DFAT advice sought in any way in terms of advice that Minister Wong's office was providing to Minister King's office?
In relation to the letter,
Yes.
or not into the production of that letter? No.
No. Right. Okay. Was that, just to be clear, was that response ever logged into Transport's system?
Senator, it is in our system. I'll need to check the precise date at which it was logged. As was indicated earlier, we didn't draft the response, but I'll
But you
check
logged the
those.
response.
Sorry,
So
Senator?
you've got the original Coro and the response from the Minister.
They're both in the department system, but I'll have to check on what date they were logged into the system, Senator.
Okay. I don't quite have to hand the relevant dates in terms of when that response was signed, sent and received, although I know we have received that, and it does seem that there are concerns that that may have been dispatched off even in advance of Qatari authorities being
Senator,
told.
if I could help the committee, it was dispatched on the 17th, is our advice.
It's dispatched on the 17th of July.
That's correct, Senator.
Put into your system on the 17th.
No, sent to the lawyers on the 17th.
Wow. Yeah.
I need to go back and check what the lawyers said there, but okay.
Find out when the lawyers said they got them.
Mr. Jadwat, I understand Minister Wong has claimed public interest immunity over the documents, which, as we've ascertained, would relate at least to the email of 24 January from the Middle East team to her office, and then presumably any communications she had with Minister King's office. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
And on what grounds has that been claimed?
Well, Senator, refer you to the letter from Minister Wong to the President of the Senate, where the letter says that the disclosure of documents found to potentially be within the scope of the order would prejudice Australia's international relations. Disclosure of such documents would not be in the public interest, as it would harm Australia's ability to negotiate international agreements between governments, by undermining the trust and confidence in which such agreements are negotiated.
So, and that's similar grounds to those being claimed by the Department of Transport. It's been acknowledged by various clerks of the Senate previously, Harry Evans previously, Rosemary Lang previously, that there can be, by claiming PII on basis of international relations, a jeopardy created that the claim itself presents or suggests problems that may not actually exist as determinants in terms of the claim. Has that been considered between either department and ministers in relation to your discussions with officers about the making of a PII claim?
Well, Senator, it's the minister's claim, and my role is to abide and comply with that. I don't have the background to the legal rationale for it.
Okay, so there hasn't been that engagement, to your knowledge, between the minister's office and the department about the tension or the potential jeopardy that exists between, if we release documents, what harm does that create to international relations, versus if we make a sweeping PII claim, as both departments have, what impression does that create that could create harm to international relations by the creation of an impression and a lack of transparency from government?
That sort of conversation has not occurred.
Right. It seems to be leaving it all hanging in a very unfortunate position in terms of the potential impression created. But if we come back to Mrs. Purvis-Smith's evidence at the outset, you have not cited, in terms of the national interest grounds, anything that would suggest any concerns in relation to Australia's relationship with Qatar or of the safety of Australians in Qatar or any of those types of matters in the grounds you claim to have been the reason that the Minister made the national interest determination to reject this request.
So again, the PII claim is the Minister's PII claim, Senator, as I think you are aware, and it is the disclosing of the nature of bilateral relations with Australia's foreign partners. I think when I went through some of the reasons that the Minister had stated for her decisions, it was some of the reasons, but the PII, because these are treaty negotiations, the public interest is that disclosing such discussions and information would be contrary to international relations, given that they are treaty negotiations in the same way that Minister Wong made the PII claim.
Mr Jadbutt, can you take on notice for any communication between Minister Wong or her office and representatives of the women affected by or subjected to the appalling incident in Doha in 2020? And separately, can you also take on notice any contact between Minister Wong or her office and Qantas in relation to the Qatar application, or in fact any engagement, meetings or discussions that may have occurred at all during the period between August last year and July this year?
Yes, Senator, we'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. I have some questions, but I know Senator White has at the moment.
Can I just ask you, sorry, I can't read your name because I've got my glasses on, but anyway.
Ridwan Jadwat, Senator.
Jadwat, yeah. Can you explain to the committee DFAT's role in the decision-making process on bilateral air services agreements?
Well, Senator, it really is a matter for the Department of Transport. We don't really play a role in those services agreements. If we're asked for input, of course we'll provide it from a foreign affairs and trade perspective, but normally we don't really engage in it in a very substantive way.
I presume you keep an eye on it,
yes,
because it's a matter between government to government?
Yes, because bilateral relations, you know, it sort of it's covered in terms of a broader remit in terms of bilateral services agreements. Bilateral relations are linked to that.
And so can you make any observations about how long these agreements often take to negotiate and the toing and froing in relation to them?
Well, Senator, I don't have the expertise on how long it would take. Again, I would defer to my colleagues from the Department of Transport. I think some of them could take a significant period of time.
Yeah, they've given that evidence, so I was just interested in your perspective of it. I mean, these are matters that are done through diplomatic channels, aren't they? It's not being done with a particular airline or it's government to government or government agency to government agency.
That's right. I mean, in this case, the Qatar Civil Aviation Authority.
Yeah. So you've been obviously watching this clearly, but also you would have had your department would have had a watching brief in relation to, well, not watching, you were involved after the 2020 airport incident in Doha, and then I presume you've also been watching since that time the litigation of...
Yes, Senator, absolutely.
Yeah. And why would you be doing that?
Well, Senator, because our embassy in Doha made a number of representations after that terrible incident in October of 2020. I think around 80 representations have been made, and of course they're in touch with the Qatari authorities to make those representations, and we followed the case very closely.
Because it was a significant incident, wasn't it, involving Australian citizens?
Yes, it was a terrible incident, Senator.
Yeah.
And Minister Wong has spoken about that in Parliament, and she reiterated how we all felt about that.
And the Minister at the time, Minister Payne.
Absolutely, and Minister Payne took a significant role in that in her time.
And I'll put this broadly, there's litigation, isn't there, underway now by Mark lawyers on behalf of their clients. Have you been following that litigation?
Yes, Senator, but as it's legal proceedings, I wouldn't want to comment on it.
No, I'm not going to ask you about the merits of it, but I might ask you about a couple of technical matters that have occurred. Are you able to answer those? To see what they are.
I'll see
Do
what
you
they
happen
are.
to know when the Qatar Airlines claimed sovereign immunity in that federal court case?
I don't have the exact date for that, Senator, but I can take that on notice.
Thank you. Anybody from the Department of Transport know?
I don't have the exact date, Senator.
If you could take that on notice and perhaps advise us when that was likely to have been. I don't think I have. No, that's enough for me.
Thank you so much, Senator White. I've got a couple of areas that I want to pursue. Just on the FOI, Mr Wolfe and Ms Purvis-Smith, I'd remind officials that you are required to the best of your ability, give us honest answers. And to a man and woman, you couldn't recall briefs going up to the Minister. But there is indeed an FOI, right? There is indeed an FOI for a meeting between Minister King and Qantas on November the 23rd. Is that not the case?
That's correct. And actually, Senator, I was going to ask to get back to you on that answer. I have received information that we provided a brief on the 23rd of November 2022, a meeting brief for a meeting with Alan Joyce.
To my point, Mr Wolfe would have known that when I asked the question earlier. Is that not correct?
Senator, that's not our brief. So it's a generic brief about Qantas, as I understand it, as opposed to my area, which is international aviation.
Right. So, so you don't just look after the FOIs. Everyone does their own, do they, Mr. Wolfe?
That's right.
Okay,
Senator.
I thought you were the FOI specialist. Sorry, Ms Purvis-Smith, keep going.
So I was going to alert you that I have been informed that we did provide a brief to the Minister, a meeting brief for a meeting with Alan Joyce on the 23rd of November 2022.
So just remind me again when the submission was received by the department into Qatar Airways from Qantas. That was October
That was the 14th of October.
14th of October. And on the 16th of November, Qantas says they want a meeting, and that meeting takes place on the 23rd of November. Is that correct?
I don't have information on when the meeting request was
thankfully,
made.
the Australian Financial Review and the diligent work of Ron Mizzen through his FOI can reveal the meeting was sought by Mr Joyce on November the 16th and took place in Parliament House on the 23rd. Were any of the departmental officials in attendance of that meeting?
There were no departmental officials in attendance.
What did the brief contain?
I don't actually have the brief in front of me, but I can see if I can give you an idea of the types of things it contained.
I'd really appreciate that, given that's the level of detail we're trying to go to. The information obtained by the Financial Review says that Qantas told the government they're basically making a lot of money flying full planes, and lack of capacity is quite good for their profits. Can you confirm whether that was part of either the advice or the information obtained from that meeting?
Can I clarify information obtained from,
it's a meeting
from
with Mr. Joyce.
Qantas?
Mr Joyce has told the Minister on the 23rd of November that they make a lot of money from having full planes, lack of capacity, particularly to Europe through the Middle East, is good for their bottom line, and he'd like her to keep that in mind while she's considering the Qatar Airways request.
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator. We were not part of that meeting.
Okay, thank you. Just going back to Minister Wong, was it Minister Wong that raised the issue of the Qatar, the issue at Hamad Airport with Minister King, or was it Minister King's office seeking advice?
I'm sorry. In what context was that, Senator?
In the context you were just speaking with Senator Birmingham about. So, Minister Wong requested advice from the department so that she could then have a meeting with or feed into Minister King's office, or was it the other way round? Minister King approached Minister Wong. Minister Wong got some advice from the department to assist her with that.
Following the discussion that Mr Wong had when she was transiting Doha in September of last year, you're referring to that, Senator?
No, I'm referring to the minister-to-minister conversations that went on.
Oh, in January of this year?
Yes.
I think I'd have to refer that to the Minister's office, because they approached us, Minister Wong's office approached us. I believe it was because they were approached by Minister King's office. Okay,
thank you. Sorry, that's what I needed to know. So in terms of the advice the department provided Minister Wong, how much was the incident at Hamad Airport in 2020? How much was that incident a part of the advice you provided back to Minister Wong?
Well, Senator,
the dominant. I don't want you to go to the details, but the dominant issue within that advice, or an aside, or one of many.
Well, Senator, I'd refer you again to the public interest immunity claim. I can't go to any of the contents of that.
I'm not asking you to go to the contents. I'm asking you to go to, was it the dominant issue in the advice that you provided back to Minister Wong?
Well, Senator, the advice we provide to the Minister's office is advice that we provide in confidence, and I wouldn't want to characterise that advice.
Just on the response to that appalling incident itself, what assurances has Australia received from Qatar in relation to changed practices since that incident?
Well, Senator, as Minister Wong said in Parliament on the 11th of September, we've tasked our officials, including our ambassador to Doha, to continue to engage with the Qatari authorities in support of the requests made by the women, and that has been done on numerous occasions. The government of Qatar has given assurances to all travellers that such an incident will not occur. And as the Minister said, the Australian government is aware that some complainants have also initiated legal proceedings following that appalling incident, and it wouldn't be appropriate for us to go into that. But the Qatari government put together a task force, and the task force has put together recommendations. They also put on trial the police captain that was involved in that terrible incident, and he was convicted and sentenced. So my understanding is that remedial actions were taken by the Qatari government, and they've apologised, including at the prime ministerial level. So they've repeatedly assured us that this is something that was, an appalling and horrific incident, and it wouldn't happen again.
So at a systemic level, they have acted in relation to the incident itself, but also acted in terms of trying to ensure through the task force and through processes that such a grievous breach, which resulted in a criminal prosecution under their system, would not occur again.
Yes.
Does DFAT, through travel advice, have any concerns for the safety of travellers through Hamad International Airport?
We have not put forward any recommendations in our travel advice in relation to Hamad International Airport.
So in that sense, the grievous breach, which was appalling, but also against, as it turns out, thankfully Qatari law at the time, has not been repeated and has not necessitated any change in status advice for DFAT's travel advice.
That's right, Senator.
Okay. Is DFAT aware of any above average, beyond the usual consular issues or concerns that arise for travellers, particularly now in this post-COVID period, travelling through Hamad International Airport?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator.
No. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We have got evidence from Mark lawyers that they received the letter about this incident from Minister King on July 10th, but according to the Sydney Morning Herald, Amelia Maguire, King's office maintains this letter was not sent until July 17th, which actually accords with your internal records. Is that right, Ms Purvis-Smith?
That accords with our records.
Could you explain why the lawyers for these women have a very different... Could the letter have been sent twice? Could it have gone officially into your system on the 17th? But could it have been sent from the Minister's office directly to Mark lawyers on the 10th?
I would like to speculate. I don't know.
But is that possible? Is it a requirement for a letter to leave a minister's office to have to go through your records keeping system?
It's not a requirement, Senator. That is, as you are aware, we have normal processes for that to happen. I don't know why the lawyers received it earlier
on the 10th.
Yep, on the 10th, earlier than our records indicate.
A week earlier than the official record would show. Because it's kind of a neat timeline then, isn't it? The Minister hasn't, on the 10th, hadn't let the Prime Minister know, hadn't let the Qatar Civil Aviation know, hadn't let a whole lot of people that were intimately involved in this request know the outcome of her decision, and yet she let this group of people know.
And I'm not aware, Senator, to be able to
Well, your minister office maintains that the letter wasn't sent until July 17. But the reality is, and the evidence we're hearing today, is we have no idea when it was sent. We know it was logged into the departmental official processes on the 17th. We don't know when it was sent, do we, Ms Purvis? But we know when it was logged.
Our records show that it was sent on the 17th, but I don't know how the lawyers received it on the 10th.
Okay, thank you. We'll follow up with the lawyers.
Transport advised DFAT on the 12th of July. Did you also advise PM&C?
I don't believe we did, Senator.
No. Are you aware of any advice between Minister King's office and the Prime Minister's office?
No, Senator.
Could you take on notice, please, when Minister King's office advised the Prime Minister's office of her decision?
We absolutely will, Senator, but to my knowledge, the information we have is that it's in the public domain. I think there's been discussions in the Parliament.
There's been a public response of the Prime Minister saying when he became aware. That's distinctly different from when his office became aware.
Sorry, Senator, we certainly don't engage with the PMO, but we'll double check that, Senator.
We'll take that on notice.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you. Let's just add to that as well. If there was any advice provided from Minister King's office to the Prime Minister's office in the days or weeks leading up to the 10th of July about an intended decision on the brief.
We'll take that on notice.
And while we're at it, communications between Minister King's office and the PMO in January of this year about an intended decision on the brief. And by communications, I mean all of them, verbal and written, electronic and otherwise.
We'll take that on notice, Senator.
Thank you.
Mr Vincent, what's the name of... whose name is on the brief for the 23rd of November?
Senator, this is the matter I said I would check on, and I can confirm it is my name on the
wow.
on the brief.
An hour and a half later, we get there. Well done, Mr Vincent.
So certainly, Senator, yes, I can confirm.
Is that the only brief you've provided to the Minister's office on meetings with Qantas?
I'm still checking, Senator. So,
There's so many.
There's
so many, Mr Vincent.
Well, no. You asked for a year's worth of meeting briefs.
No, I asked since the Qatar Airways application was received.
Yes, Senator, I can confirm I provided a meeting brief around Qantas on 23 November 2020, around a meeting for the 23rd of November 2022. I'm still checking what other meeting briefs might be in our system.
Is this a meeting brief that was FOI'd by the Financial Review?
Yes, it is, Senator.
Could you provide a redacted copy that the Financial Review has been able to get out of your department as a result of FOI, and yet your minister refuses to provide that to this committee or the Senate?
We can provide.
You can provide something that you've already given
yes.
to a media organisation under FOI, but your minister has refused to give the same information to the Senate when she was served with an order for production of documents, and she's refused to give this committee when we asked for those documents.
To be clear, Senator, this is a meeting brief.
Yes, I get it.
Yeah.
I would like the meeting brief.
Yes, Senator.
Today, now, the redacted version that you've given. Yep.
We can email the redacted version to the
committee.
Secretariat.
That would be fantastic, to the Secretariat. I would like, and Mr Vincent, if you have any other enlightenments that I don't have to go to the Financial Review to get, I would love you to let us know. And Ms Purvis, I know there's an army of public servants at home, back in the department, bowels of the department. They can very easily scour meeting brief, King, Qantas.
Yes, Senator.
Please, that is a 2-second job, and I would like to know the dates and whether those briefs were done because we can ask questions all morning. So the sooner we get that information, the better.
Where the team is looking at that now.
Yeah, team, that's a 2-second search into the diary or your brief section. I just want to go to airport demand management. It's been an issue that has been, the committee's been, oh, you want, Senator White? Yeah, sure. Senator White?
So, can I just clarify the letter of the letter dated the 10th of July 2023. That's the date on the letter to Mark Lawyers, isn't it? But you are adamant that it wasn't sent till the 17th. Is that right, 17th? Oh.
Our records show that it was sent on the 17th.
Is it uncommon for letters to have one date and be sent on another date?
I'm not sure. Sometimes it could occur.
Yeah.
It depends. You know, there could sometimes be some time between when the minister signs a letter and when it's dispatched. So there could well be some time between those two occurrences.
Between it. So it's possible that Mark Lawyers, in suggesting they got it on the 10th, are looking at the date of the letter rather than when it actually got sent.
I'm not sure what Mark Lawyers are looking at.
Well, maybe we need to clarify that with them. It wouldn't have been the first time that I've done that. We've got a date and then you rely on the date on the letter and you don't actually look at the... you rely on the date on the letter rather than when you actually got it. Can I just also just ask you, there was a suggestion that a document was requested in the Senate and that you're going to now provide a redacted version of it that was through FOI. In checking through the, in checking and finding that document, could you just check whether or not there was a request from the Senate for that document?
I can check that. I know that the order to produce public documents covered a range of documents.
Yeah.
It would. I'm not sure to be able to tell you definitively whether that document was included in scope.
Yeah. Well, see if you can tell us definitively if you have a look at your records. It doesn't have to be today, but it can be by the time that we've requested information. Thank you.
Thank you. Slot management. So a lot of the evidence given to the inquiry is around the lack of competition in the domestic market. We've had the author of the Harris Review before us. We've heard significant evidence and powerful evidence from both Canberra and Sydney Airport about the lack of competition and the impact on cancellation and delays and slot hoarding, particularly by Qantas, but not exclusively by Qantas. And I would like to understand where the Harris Review consultations are up to and what advice has been provided to the Minister. Who can help me with that?
I can help you with that, Senator.
Excellent, Ms Werner.
Thank you very much for the question. So the Harris Review, the government said in the Aviation Green Paper that they had recently concluded targeted consultation regarding potential changes to the scheme, with a particular eye to modernising the slot allocation framework and strengthening compliance measures to ensure the slots are not being misused by airlines. And the Green Paper says that the government will have more announcements to make about these reforms in due course.
Yes, Ms Werner. When was the consultation conducted by the department following the completion of Peter Harris's review?
The Harris Review was completed in February 2021.
Yep.
There were, in August 2021, the department commenced consultations with industry, community and government stakeholders through a series of technical working groups.
So that included your 50... Is this...
No, there's a totally different group of stakeholders.
Could you table the list of...
the attendees at the
that would be
technical
really
working groups?
Thank you.
Yes, I can do that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Secretary.
And so the technical working groups lasted from, I think it was August until February 2021.
August 2021 till February 2022.
Yep.
Okay.
So we held 25 technical working group meetings.
That's great. It's been a long-standing problem. That is good. So did the department then draft some advice for the then minister?
Well, I don't have a record of that, noting that in April 22, I think that government went into caretaker mode and there was an election
February,
on the 21st
March,
of May.
April. You've done the consultation.
I don't have a record of us providing advice post those consultations.
Post those consultations?
No.
Okay. And that's no advice to either the previous government or the current?
Apologies, to the previous government.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And so then my next question will be...
The current government, yes.
This is a serious piece of work that the industry's been calling for forever.
Yep.
What advice has been provided to this government?
So we then provided advice to Minister King on the 28th of October of 2022. We provided further advice to Minister King on the 2nd of December 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And then we released a revised option papers for targeted consultation on the 19th of May 2023.
Whoa. Does the targeted consultation cohort include people that weren't included in the August to February technical?
No, it doesn't, Senator.
They're
no.
the same people?
It's not the entire group, no, it's a smaller group.
How small?
Well, it was Sydney Airport,
Yep.
the RAAA, Air
Yep.
Services Australia, Airport Coordination Australia, Qantas, Virgin, Rex, IATA and BARA, so 9.
Right, okay, thank you. Thank you. So what was the nature of your advice on the 28th of October? Was it how to implement or the outcomes of your consultations around the implementation of the Harris Review recommendations?
I think that's a reasonable characterisation. So after the consultation that had been undertaken through the 25 technical working groups, which had produced a number of different options that could be pursued, the department provided advice on options for the minister to consider consulting further on.
Yep. Okay, so options were provided to the minister on the 28th of October. What happened with that brief? When did it land back in the department?
So the minister requested more detailed advice in response to that brief, and I'm sorry I don't have the date that that request was made, but in response to that request we provided a further brief on the 2nd of December 2022.
So sorry, more information, and the more information brief came up on the 2nd?
Correct, yes. And then the brief was signed by the minister on the 9th of February.
Would it be fair to characterise I think Mr Harris is quite clear in his public commentary and within the review, and we've heard significant evidence to this committee that the real winner of the current arrangement at Sydney Airport is Qantas. Is that the feedback the department got from its consultations?
No, Senator, I haven't seen that reflected in the outcomes of the consultations that I've reviewed.
So when you spoke to Sydney Airport?
Yes.
And they didn't give you that view?
Well, unfortunately, I've just handed over my record of what was said in the consultations,
okay.
So I apologise for that.
I might have a look at that.
However, Sydney Airport certainly has expressed frustration with a number of the elements of the demand management scheme that is applied at Sydney Airport, and a lot of those issues were fleshed out in the Harris Review in February 2021. Specific complaints as to a specific airline and not something that I recall seeing in the outcomes of the consultation documents.
So I guess the very public commentary of the airports, not just Sydney but also of Rex, less so Virgin because they are also accused, and the ACCC has also been quite scathing of it as well. All right, do you have an idea or a timeline when the Minister may be seeking, I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway, would be seeking to make a decision around the options you presented to her, or she sent it out to that smaller group?
Where the timing for future steps are a matter for government.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when does this smaller group report back?
The smaller group has reported back.
When did that finish?
It concluded in July 2023.
Yep. Do you have a date?
I don't have a date for the conclusion of the consultations. I have a date for when we provided the Minister with advice on the outcomes of the consultations, which was on the 11th of July 2023. And the Minister's response to that brief was received on the 5th of September 2023.
So back down to the department.
Indeed,
in
yes.
September.
Yes.
And what's the next step?
The next step is for government to make a decision on the policy approach.
Okay, so they've got all the information they need, deeply consulted, and now they have to decide on an announcement strategy.
They have to decide. I mean, the implementation of the full suite of the Harris Review reforms would require legislative change.
Yep.
So it'll be a lengthy process.
Is there a way to get some quick... I mean, Mr Harris was very clear. There's some ways to get some quick runs on the board early. Obviously, legislative change is never the preferred pathway for ministers who want to see reform, as I recall, for a variety of reasons. Are there some quick wins?
There are certainly things that we are looking at doing, Senator, but probably the most effective way of countering some of the issues that have come up would be through changes to the scheme itself. There are a number of different instruments in the scheme. So we have legislation, regulation and then disallowable instruments. Potentially we could make some changes to the disallowable instruments rather than pursuing legislative change. Mr Harris also, we have also been looking at what we can do. There are a range of things we could potentially do that don't require legislative change, yes, and they are all under consideration.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of things. I just want to be crystal clear on one thing to start with. So there was, from the department's perspective, essentially a 6-month hiatus from early January this year to early July this year, where the decision brief sat with the Minister. You weren't asked for further advice. You didn't provide further advice. Anything that happened in relation to the brief and its consideration or additional advice in that 6-month period happened in the Minister's office with no involvement from the department.
I think the Minister was considering it for that period of time and undertaking consultations and considerations in the office and between offices.
Your evidence earlier was that the only engagement the department had during that six-month period was to say to the Minister's office, hey, where's it at?
We were not asked and we didn't provide any further advice following on from that initial piece of advice.
Yep. And even when the Minister sought some Foreign Affairs advice or information, that was done Minister's office to Minister's office, not with any direct departmental engagement.
That's correct.
So all information that we might be seeking around what transpired in that 6-month period comes back to the Minister herself and her office and their engagements or discussions.
I think in terms of the consideration of the matter, there there were considerations and discussions at ministerial level.
Yes, we're aware clearly that there were some, and we're also aware, at least from the evidence of others, that there was engagement and discussions the Minister was having with airline chief executives and others during that time. How have you gone so far in terms of the Minister's office coming back to you about a meeting between the Minister and Mr Joyce on or around the 23rd of January?
I've not received any information. I think any requests in relation to outcomes that the Minister had will need to be directed to the Minister directly.
Sorry, is that the response?
In a sense, we have no information
Your people have asked her people. Have her people replied?
I think that we don't have any access, and so any request would need to be made.
Do you need to go in camera, Ms Purvis-Smith, to give us the answer?
No, I don't. Any request, I don't have access. We don't have access. Any request in relation to outcomes of discussions that the Minister may have had where the department was not in attendance would need to be made directly to the Minister and her office.
Mrs Purvis-Smith, you were very helpful and upfront before in indicating that you had sent a message to your team to ask them to ask the Minister's office.
I said I'd see what I could do, and the outcome is that any request would need to be directed directly to the Minister's office. The Minister.
So that is what the Minister's office has come back to your team with?
I think that's the advice I have received. That the request
I would like the precise wording of that advice, please, and how it was provided.
Well, I think I've just received that from my team.
You've received it by a message while you've been sitting there?
We don't have. I don't have any information.
Have you received it by a message while you've been sitting there? Would you like to read the message to me, please?
It might not be to me, sorry.
Take your time, it's okay. I'm very happy to wait for this.
Yes, it did. I was looking at the wrong text message. My apologies.
It's okay, we all have those challenges.
The text message I received is that MO view is it is not for the department to answer re the Minister's diary. The question should be directed to the Minister.
All right, let's go back to the MO and ask them if the Minister is willing to appear before the committee.
MO, come on down.
Because that's the situation they've put us in now. If Minister King's office is saying get stuffed when her own department is seeking to provide information to this committee, then Minister King should front up herself. Because that's the situation we're left with here. It is completely unacceptable for a situation where a minister's office, being asked by officials, put in an impossible position about a pretty simple and factual matter: did a meeting happen or did it not happen? That's their only question. And they could say yes or no very simply. Now, I know their minister's on leave at present, but they're putting her in a terrible position in terms of public perceptions. They're putting you and the officials in a very uncomfortable position. And I'm sorry, we're left with nothing but to have to prosecute via these means. I don't want us to have to break rules around calling ministers' staff to the table. That's not territory that we wish to get into. So if the attitude of Minister King and her office is they're not going to tell the department, then there are precedents for House of Representatives ministers to appear before Senate committees before, and it looks like Minister King should think very carefully about doing so to actually address this question. Because to be really clear, what they're saying to you is that Minister King's office, despite a request from her own department to help with evidence, are unwilling to confirm whether or not she had a meeting or discussion with Alan Joyce on or around 23rd of January this year, days after she had told the Virgin CEO that she expected to approve the negotiating mandate that your department had sent up to her to enable Qatar to have additional flights into this country. Well, Mrs Purvis-Smith, I'm sorry you have been put in this impossible position, and certainly we will pursue this in relation to Minister King and her standing and approach. Let's flip then to when the decision was finally made. You said the department was informed verbally on the day of the 10th of July. Was the department given any advice leading up to that to indicate that its recommendations would not be approved, its negotiating mandate would not be approved, and that the answer would be no to Qatar?
I think, as we mentioned, we didn't receive any further requests for advice. My colleagues can confirm that, or whether there was anything else. But we didn't provide any further information. We weren't asked for any further information in relation to the decision.
Right. Were you asked to help with communications materials, talking points or other matters at that time from the 10th of July?
My colleagues might be able to answer.
Yes, Senator, we were.
All right. What materials were you asked to prepare?
In essence, we asked to draft a letter to the Qatar CAA, which I sent, and also some general talking points in relation to the current state of Australian international aviation.
Okay. Refresh my memory, have those documents been released?
I think in the FOI we have released the relevant parts.
Right. Perhaps they could be tabled for the committee so it can be incorporated into the committee's processes as well, please.
We can.
So both the letter to Qatari authorities as well as the talking points. Thank you. I want to just go to, and sorry, if we could get those promptly, I assume they're readily available. Thank you. The department has been helpful in coming back with documents during the course of this morning, and I want to acknowledge your helpfulness in terms of departmental documents, even if the Minister's office is being less than helpful. In the consultation papers or processes that we discussed at the beginning of the day, and these are some of the documents you've tabled, both the consultation on priorities as well as the consultation on the Qatari application or request include a seemingly standard phrase on all three emails that we've been provided with. One email dated 2 August and 2 emails dated 30 September, the former relating to the negotiating program, the latter relating to the Qatar request. And each of them contain the words that, please note that your input may be included in future briefings for delegation members, including those attending from industry, unless you advise us that your input is in confidence. What's the meaning of that inclusion in all of those communications?
Senator, going back some years, it was practice that when there were formal negotiations, so in-person negotiations, the delegations could include representatives from organisations other than the department, at times DFAT, particularly if it was a negotiation in another country. Going back some time, it also would include airline representatives from both countries. That's not typically the practice that we have at the moment. I think those words relate to that sort of historical approach, but this is what would typically happen in a negotiation. Is there is a briefing pack prepared, which includes the existing arrangements, a range of other things. People other than the department wouldn't normally be handed the negotiating mandate, but would be provided potentially some of the input from other entities.
These words basically by default mean that your information could be shared with others is not confidential unless you say the information provided is in confidence. So when submissions were made by Virgin and Qantas on the Qatari application, were those submissions in part or in full indicated as being in confidence?
In relation to Qantas, yes, Senator.
In full?
Yes.
Was that made how?
In writing?
In writing?
With the request, with their submission.
Indicating that the entirety of their information was being provided in confidence?
Correct.
Right.
I don't want to break this question, so I've got taking a breath there.
Yeah, that's fine.
Otherwise, I'll raise it later. Can we just get there's the agenda for today has been set out. The committee's majority is the opposition, so it's the agenda basically the committee has decided with the opposition as the majority decision makers. Just so my staff and staff can be aware, and also the other public servants, how long are we going for this group? I mean, I have and prepared to put my flights back, so I'm prepared to be here longer. But it would be good if we could stick to a reasonable amount on the agenda, because I do have other commitments to other constituents.
And I appreciate that, and the committee was very generous to agree for the departments today. I'm looking at my colleagues, but I'm comfortable to still hold to our original agreement. And I do recognise for those other witnesses, we probably could let Tourism Australia and Austrade go. I know there are a short amount of questions for Treasury and PM&C. I know Senator Smith has some for Treasury. So, and we will try and get to them before 12, which we will get to them before 12. Thank you, Senator.
And I'm happy to make myself available if we do run over a bit over time. I've got some space, but would be of assistance if it's 12 o'clock.
Yes, not in a Mr Finch kind of effort. Thank you for your flexibility,
I think Tourism
Senator
Australia
Shelley.
and Austrade, there will be questions on notice, but it's been pretty clear from all that they weren't even consulted at all in the process.
Which were the questions we were going to ask.
So
thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Birmingham.
Thank you. In relation to the bilateral priorities, and you might want to take this on notice in terms of, sorry, did we ascertain how many parties made submissions of the 57?
I think it was 19, Senator.
19. And of those 19, can you tell us who they were?
I'm not sure if I've got that detail. Would be certainly happy to on notice, Senator.
Let's get that swiftly. And in telling us that or providing that information back to the committee, can you let us know how many of those indicated that the input was in confidence, given that's the express request that's made? I now just want to go to the analysis provided as part of that request for prioritisation. And I'm just going to find the right document from the right year here. You can keep providing us with more documents, that's right. So the growth potential for foreign airlines data correct as at 1 August 2022 document. Now, on this document, which indicates existing bilateral markets, which is the market with the least amount of growth potential because capacity services are in use?
We have several markets where we've virtually hit capacity, and yes, one of them is Qatar.
Indeed. In fact, I mean, when you say you've got several markets virtually, I can see Hong Kong where there's 6% growth potential. Nothing else under 30% growth potential.
Yeah, we should stress, Senator, that is for foreign airlines. There are one or two markets where Australian airlines are now almost reaching capacity, particularly Indonesia.
Right. And I mean, what's notable about both Hong Kong and Qatar is they're also the two where there are other services being provided in terms of within the open arrangement. That's not the case on any of the others, is it?
Correct.
In terms of market demand, when you've got Qatar operating at capacity with no room for growth, spilling over services into other markets as well, unlike pretty much any other market, that makes it a slam dunk in terms of there being strong demand for potential future growth or need for headroom, doesn't it?
I think probably asking for offer an opinion there, Senator. But I think...
Well, it's offering an expert opinion in terms of aviation markets.
Yeah, I think it's clear what markets the current status of in that chart. Yep.
It is pretty clear. And in terms of the aviation market and how it's moved since August 2022, if we look at this now, obviously Qatar remains as unrestrained as ever, as restricted as ever with no additional capacity, doesn't it?
Yes, apart from operating obviously into other ports, that's right.
Yes. Okay. The main other Middle Eastern market being the UAE, far larger, of course, many multiples the number of services available there, 168 services into the majors compared with Qatar's 28 services into the majors. The UAE, they were back then only utilising 70 services. How has that changed?
We'll get an indication of the next timetable period, which starts at the end of October. So the Emirates Airlines and Etihad will file with us by the end of the month. So we'll get a better readout then about how the market is. Overall, by the end of September, we're looking at about 91% of capacity back from a pre-COVID level.
You're still expecting significant headroom to exist in the UAE?
Oh yes, in terms of the available capacity under the UAE agreement, there's plenty of spare capacity there for the airlines.
So we'll continue to have plenty of spare capacity for the airlines in the UAE, but no additional capacity in relation to Qatar.
That's the situation.
Mrs. Purvis-Smith, at the outset you indicated that some of the reasons the Minister apparently took into consideration were what is happening with the COVID recovery. If we're reaching the point where more than 90% of pre-COVID services are back online, does that give confidence that the COVID recovery is reaching a point where it can cease to be a point of consideration?
In all our discussions, COVID recovery is still a really high, it's a recurring theme. I think we can take that we are recovering, but we haven't recovered. And I think Mr Wolf and our submission goes to that. Some airlines are not yet back, and then they're not yet back to pre-COVID levels. There are some airlines that are above pre-COVID levels, and we do have new airlines that have come online as well, which is great. But we are not back to pre-COVID levels, and not all hubs are back, and not all airlines have put all of their capacity back on yet. So we are still monitoring the market.
Is there a reason why, in considering COVID recovery, you're only talking about airlines?
No, not at all. And I talk about these with airports as well. And so it's not just airlines, as well as countries and routes and the market, and international and domestic. So it's just that in terms of the bilateral and what we were looking at here, you were focusing on capacity and term, and so that's where I went through to airlines. But we speak to all parts of the aviation sector, and all parts are recovering to a certain extent, but they're not back to pre-COVID yet, so that is why we're still monitoring the market.
Would it be reasonable if the government wanted to review this decision to do so now, that since you prepared your brief way back at the start of this year, indeed prepared it at the end of last year and submitted it at the start of this year, that the market has evolved and moved on significantly in that time, and that there would be fresh and additional circumstances to consider?
That would be up to the government and the minister.
It would be reasonable for them to do that if they chose to?
I think that is asking for an opinion. It would be up to the minister and the government.
Has the market changed in that time?
The market is always evolving, and I think Mr Wolf mentioned that we will get more information about the market shortly going forward when we have a look at their timetables.
Okay. Qatari authorities have...
Did you ask about ACCC report?
No.
So there's been 3 ACCC monitoring reports since in that time frame that Senator Birmingham's talking about. So it's not just the market's always changing. There's an incredible amount of data that the department could make and avail itself of. And so you didn't think to go back and ask both Qantas and Virgin to update their submissions on the Qatar Airways request in the 6 months since the brief went up and the minister's decision?
We've not asked for Qantas or Virgin to update their submissions.
Despite the significant shift over what essentially is an 8-month period of time between October 22 and July 23.
We didn't ask for them to resubmit. Sorry.
That's okay.
I've got a couple if you...
So, sure if you want, Chair?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just interested about what advice the minister received about the ACCC monitoring.
We provided advice to the minister on the ACCC monitoring after.
When did you provide that advice?
After every report was released, Senator. I think my colleagues will be able to go through.
My colleague, Mr Vincent, to answer that one.
Senator, we actually received embargoed copies of the ACCC quarterly reports and would routinely provide a summary up to the minister's office, to the minister, sorry.
Okay, so and what's the timeline between you receiving the embargoed report and the brief going up?
It was often quite tight.
Yep.
We're probably talking days, not weeks, I think.
Yep. Okay, right. In terms of their final report, when did you send that brief up to the minister's office?
So I believe I have a feeling this one might have arrived on the 5th of June. But
arrived
in the minister. It arrived in
the embargo copy of the ACCC report.
I have a feeling. So I provided a brief on the final ACCC quarterly report. I have a feeling it hit the office on Monday, the 5th of June.
Monday, the 5th of June.
I'd have to confirm
And
that, though.
what was the contents of that? What advice did you give to the Minister around the ACCC's final report?
That it provided a summary of what the report said. It covered key messages included in the report. It mentioned it was the ACCC's last quarterly report into airline competition in Australia.
Yep.
It was for information.
It also let the Minister know. I'd just like to table a copy of this brief, please, for the committee's attention. Did it also inform the Minister that the monitoring that the ACCC was doing into cancellations and delays, etc., that function was ceasing?
Yes, the ACCC report itself noted that the monitoring regime was ceasing, and our minute noted that.
So it noted that.
And provided some background.
Yep. Did it go into the fact that the ACCC recommended that the actually is the Minister on ERC?
Minister is on ERC.
Minister is on ERC. Well, wow, lucky Minister King. I remember those days. When was the decision made by government to cease or not to continue the ACCC monitoring function?
That would be I believe the function was scheduled to conclude. Questions about the ACCC are best addressed by the Treasury portfolio, and I can confirm the brief I'm talking about arrived in the office on the 5th of June, so I've just got that confirmed.
Right. Did the ACCC in their report, the embargo copy, recommend that the function continue?
The ACCC certainly made a number of statements in their final report, I believe.
I don't need you to run through the contents of the brief, Mr Vincent. I've got it in front of me. Did the ACCC, bearing in mind these are already questions we've asked, so hopefully you've been diligent public servants and watched the evidence to this committee, did the ACCC recommend the function was a useful function for the aviation industry and should continue?
I'm looking at the ACCC executive summary. It mentions that while the Australian government's direction is expiring, the ACCC will continue to watch the airline's conduct and, where necessary, use our broad enforcement powers to take action to achieve compliance with competition law and the Australian consumer law. I'd mentioned too that I've
got the brief. I don't need you to reread the brief. The ACCC actually recommended that this was a useful function to monitor competition and anti-competitive behaviour, and that the government should consider continuing that function, didn't it, Mr Vincent?
That would be a matter for the Treasury portfolio.
No, that's not what I'm asking. Ms Werner, do you know? Ms Purvis-Smith, Mr Wood, Mr Wolfe? Did the ACCC's final report say this is useful, you should continue to do this?
I don't have the final report in front of me.
Ms Werner?
I do have the final report in front of me. I mean, it certainly says that, that the reporting had been valuable. I don't immediately see anything that suggests that it continued.
If you go to the recommendations at the end of the report.
Apologies, Senator.
It is actually the fact that the ACCC recommended that government continue this. My question to the department is, why didn't you let your minister know that the ACCC, Mr Vincent, recommended that? Nowhere in this brief is your minister informed that this is a function the ACCC thinks should continue.
Could I just comment on that one? So I suppose we were having discussions about the ACCC monitoring report in the context of drafting the Green Paper, and so she would have been briefed about it through that process, and that would have happened prior to this report being finalised.
So your contention is that the minister knew that the ACCC wanted this function to continue, the regular reporting?
Look, I couldn't say whether the minister knew that the ACCC
Well, this is why
wanted
ministers
it.
get sent noting briefs. So ministers are informed of things occurring in their own portfolio area.
I think the issue for us is that we would rely on the recommendation of the Treasury portfolio rather than their agency, their portfolio agency, the ACCC. So we would have reported the views of the Treasury portfolio.
Ah, right. So the Treasury portfolio, does that mean the Treasurer didn't know that the ACCC wasn't in his noting brief? Am I understanding how this?
I couldn't comment on what the Treasurer's noting brief.
But you're saying
had
you
either.
you lifted basically what Treasury's advice was, pop it into your noting brief, send it up to your minister.
I would say in the context of consideration of competition issues in the Green Paper, we were primarily relying on advice from the Treasury.
I'll ask the Treasurer on notice. But you actually warned your minister that stakeholders also would want it to continue, didn't you?
Yes, Senator.
Do you know how what action the minister took on behalf of the stakeholders?
I'm unaware of any specific action related to that brief, Senator. She obviously had a conversation with her cabinet colleagues in considering the Green Paper.
Has the department been asked to do a joint ERC submission with the Treasurer in terms of finding the money to continue this?
Not by our minister, Senator, no.
Okay, thank you. I also just wanted to table some polling done by the well-known Labor pollsters Redbridge, which was conducted between the 30th of August and the 4th of September 2023. Are you aware of this polling? Was it commissioned by the department?
Polling on
Polling on the question, support and opposition to additional Qatar Airlines flight into Australia. It was polling conducted by Redbridge between the 30th of August and the 4th of September 2023. Are you aware of this, Ms Purvis-Smith?
I'm not aware of this, Senator.
It wasn't commissioned by the department?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Was it commissioned by your minister?
I'm not aware, Senator.
These are well-known Labor pollsters.
No, the other partners are Liberal, just to be clear.
That actually says 56% of those polled support or strongly support additional flights.
I've not seen this before.
You have not seen this polling?
No.
I would appreciate on notice if you could examine the polling, given that you haven't seen it, and provide us with your assessment. Because at the end of the day, Australians were asked whether they support or oppose Qatar Airways' application to fly additional services into Australia. And the voting intention of all voters is 56% agree and only 5% strongly oppose. Probably all Qantas, that might be the Qantas board there. And it's broken down by voting intention, Coalition Labor, Greens, by state, East Coast states, sorry WA, you miss out again, and whether they're rural or regional. This indicates to me that the government is assessing, and your minister perhaps, is assessing why they are still talking about the Qatar Airways decision all these weeks later. And I think it's because Australians want an aviation sector where planes take off and land on time, your bags arrive at the other end with you, and they can afford a ticket. And right now, because of this government's decisions, Australians aren't getting it, and they're furious about it, which is why this is still an issue in our daily tabloids, on our morning TV shows. This isn't for the academics, this is for everyday Australians who just want an aviation system that works for them. The fact that this pollster is polling this question at the start of this month tells me that the government has had enough of taking water on this and they're about to review their decision. And they should review their decision, because even Qantas last night, Senator White, said your government should review this decision and be transparent about the reasons why. It's obviously a comment, Ms Purvis-Smith. There's no question in that. Are there any other questions, Senator Birmingham?
Just one little issue I want to close off on, and that'll hopefully do us for today. So, Qatari authorities requested formal consultations on 16 August this year. Is that correct?
Yes, I think the actual request was the 14th, but I think we received it on the 16th. Yep. Okay.
And that request is for consultations as to the reasons for the rejection of their request?
They've used the clause that's actually in the existing agreement that just talks for general consultations.
It's a bit of a cry for help. What can we do to actually get the matter reconsidered? What went wrong?
Please help us help you.
Just indicating, Senator, consultations are provided for under the agreement.
Excellent. What has the department's response been to Qatar's request for those consultations?
Senator, shortly after the request, I responded with essentially a holding request as we consider their request, but we will be meeting within that. We will be contacting Qatar to confirm that we will be having consultation.
Oh.
And there's a timeline that those consultations are under the existing agreement meant to occur within, if requested?
Senator, the agreement proposes that talks can be requested within 60 days, and we'll be responding within that period. I'd anticipate in the very near future.
So since 16 August, 43 days have elapsed. Why has the department's response to Qatar been one of putting them on hold, a bit like trying to ring the Qantas call centre, and we'll put you on hold for 43 days out of the 60-day period in which they should get a response?
Senator, certainly it is our intention to talk to them within the consultation time frame, and we obviously want to be informed as well as possible with all the relevant information about how the market looks.
So we'll wait as long as we possibly can to get the information at that stage, rather than having the information to hand that you had 42 days ago or 40 days ago or 30 days ago, and having the discussions on the basis of information at that stage?
I think, Senator, obviously we have to have an appropriate position ready for that meeting, so obviously we would need to consult with the Minister and the Minister. Well,
the Minister's got her polling in, so she might be able to answer Qatar's request now.
I mean, the departments, the ministers are applying public interest immunity claims over all manner of documents, saying that it might harm international relations, and particularly relations presumably with Qatar. How does it help relations with Qatar to put them on hold for 43 days out of a 60-day period?
Senator, I think my colleague said that we would consult and have talks with the Qatari CCA within the 60-day period.
No. What information are you looking for the Minister to help inform those discussions?
Well, in essence, if we're having a meeting with another country, we're looking for a briefing. We'll be providing advice as to what we intend to raise at that meeting.
So have you asked the Minister for her views as to what should be raised or what could be raised?
Well, I think in terms of going forward, that would be the important part about, okay, what's next?
56% of Australians support changing the decision.
So you haven't yet asked the Minister for her views?
No, we will need to get a clear position for that meeting.
Are they holding on a direction?
So you haven't in the 43 days asked the Minister for her views, but there's 17 left. It's not going to give the Minister a particularly long period of time to respond.
Well, I think we'll be doing it shortly, Senator, because obviously we're about to start receiving all the international timetables for the period ahead, and that will clearly inform our discussions with Qatar.
Could such an approach lead to a revisiting or reviewing of the decision? Are there any provisions for that within the existing agreement or the way in which these agreements are assessed?
That's a matter for the Minister.
But the provision exists within...
Yes, the provision exists.
So there's nothing stopping the government from reviewing this decision?
Review at any time is allowed for.
Thank you.
Excellent. Just, Department, has the Minister's Office directed you to not send up briefs unless they've first been discussed with her verbally? Or the Office?
No, Senator.
Right. Thank you. Senator Sheldon?
Senator, if I may, I've just got some information that you requested a little while ago.
Excellent. We've got about 4 minutes and Senator Sheldon's got some bring us home questions.
Shall I do that at the end? I don't want to take time away from
do it now
Senator
and then
Sheldon.
Senator Sheldon, you have the call.
You're more than welcome to go forward. Thank you for being so polite.
So just to confirm that there are, we provided a meeting brief for a meeting with Alan Joyce on the 23rd of November 2022, which we provided
I knew
previously.
that thanks to the Fin review.
There were no other meeting briefs in relation to meeting with Qantas or Alan Joyce.
Right.
There was one other meeting brief found that was a Jet Zero Council meeting brief where Qantas was in attendance, but there was no other meeting briefs.
Thank you very much.
Can I also mention, my apologies, in relation to the meeting brief, in relation to the meeting with Alan Joyce on the 23 November and the FOI that provided a redacted version, I have confirmed that that document was not in scope of the set of documents for the order of production of documents, and in particular it was not drafted or provided as part of specifically discussions in relation to the Qatar application, so it did not fall in scope of those documents.
So we're able to provide the committee with that. Thank you.
I think we might already have provided a redacted version of the...
Great. We've just got a pile of docs at the moment. Senator Sheldon.
Good, thanks. You may have to take this on notice, but in 2018, did Minister McCormack ever make public, including via media release, other forms of public communication, that he was delaying granting additional spots to Qatar?
We'll check that for you, Senator.
That would help with transparency. Thank you. And just to clarify, some assertions that were made regarding the Redbridge. Are you aware that Mr Tony Barry is the director of Redbridge, and in 2003 Mr Barry accepted a position as the Deputy State Director of the Liberal Party Victorian Division. Mr Barry also joined the staff of Malcolm Turnbull in 2008 as his Senior Press Secretary. Mr Barry also started his career in 1997 working as a media advisor for the MP Christopher Pyne. Are you aware of that?
I was not aware of it, Senator.
That's okay.
But it's okay.
That's okay.
Now everyone's aware of it.
Mr Barry, I know, will be very happy to have been name-checked and had his CV read out.
And I believe that...
Have you got a photo?
Well, considering there's a whole series of assertions made inaccurately by the chair and the people and the opposition, while you sat there saying nothing but you knew the answer, is offensive.
Yeah.
Now, I also want to point out that I believe that the polling is also the so-called secret polling that was published in the AFR earlier this month. And the Chair's just confirming it with a Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the departments.
So the Chair knowingly knew it was not Labor polling. Yes, the Chair knew it was not Labor polling. Yeah. So it's just, I find the whole line of questioning offensive.
It's certainly a preferred Labor firm.
Tony Barry's not a preferred Labor person.
I think that polling
you were not being transparent. You're misrepresenting the truth, and you're putting inappropriate questions to the knowingly to the department.
Do what the Australian people want. They will review the Qatar Airways
not
decision.
Including WA. You reckon that's a great poll? Give me a break.
Okay. There being no further questions other than a slew of on notice,